I call to order and welcome you to the Middletown, Ohio regular City Council meeting for Tuesday, September 3rd, 2024. Please join me for a moment of meditation followed by the Pledge of Allegiance to the American flag. You will hear 3 taps of the gavel when it is time to stand. Please join me in a moment of meditation now. Clerk of Council, Mrs. Skank, please call the attendance roll.
Mr. Farrell?
Here.
Mrs. Carter? Mr. West?
Here.
Mr. Horn?
Here.
Mayor Slamka?
Here. Do we have a motion to excuse Mrs. Carter?
Motion.
May I have a second?
Second.
Mrs. Skank?
Mr. West?
Yes.
Mr. Horn?
Yes.
Mayor Slamka?
Yes.
Mr. Farrell?
Yes.
Okay, the yeses have it, and the motion passes. The next item on the agenda are the public hearings that we have this evening. We have 3 public hearings on the agenda. Law Director Ben Yoder will explain kind of how the evening will go, and you have the floor just for the swearing in as well.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, so as the mayor had said, we have 3 hearings on the agenda tonight. The first one is a rezoning application for JA development. Second one is another zoning application pertaining to Roosevelt Boulevard property for Oak Street Health. And then the third one is a separate hearing for the proposed text amendments that I think have gone through various iterations. There's the marijuana ones that are on there, as well as it also relates to the architectural standards. So we're going to have each of those hearings separately. If you think that you might want to give testimony in any of those 3 hearings, we're just going to swear everybody in at the same time. Then when it comes your time to actually speak, we'll just ask that you do so from the podium and that you'll give your name, give your address, and then confirm the fact that you've been sworn in. So for any of those 3 hearings, if you think that you might want to give testimony tonight, go ahead and stand up and raise your right hand and I will swear you in. We got 2 takers. No more? All right, easy enough. All right, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give is true and accurate to the best of your knowledge and belief? Yes. Great, thank you. You may be seated. Mayor?
Thank you very much. Okay, so we will begin with our public hearing for the map amendment case number, and Mrs. Carter, good evening, number 924, a request for applicant JA Development on behalf of property owner Ravello Properties for approval of a preliminary development plan to contract 140 single-family attached residential homes on Town Boulevard. Did we receive any comments? Do we have a staff report?
I'll be giving the staff report. We did not receive any comments for this one.
Okay, Ms. Ashley Combs, please continue.
Okay, thank you. So Mayor Slamka did a great job of introducing the case. This is a picture from the property off of Town Boulevard. Next slide, please. So the subject property is currently zoned B2, Community Business District. Multifamily dwellings are not permitted within this district. Per the Middletown Development Code, the purpose of this zoning district is to provide areas in the city that will contain a wide variety of commercial and office uses to meet the needs of the city and region that require access to major arterial streets and or in close proximity to major residential neighborhoods. So as you can see there, again, off of Town Boulevard, the red highlighted property is the one that we are discussing tonight. Next slide. This is the preliminary site development plan that you see. The red along Town Boulevard, those would be rear-loaded garages for those homes. The yellow and the red would have front-loaded. Again, it's 140 different residential units. Next slide. We look at the comprehensive plan. The 2022 identifies this as the regional mixed-use district, which is primarily commercial uses that cater to I-75 traffic in the regional market, with secondary uses that include office, medical, service, and residential. Next slide. These are some of the proposed elevations. There are 3 slides. So this is the first. Next slide. And next slide. And next slide. So staff analysis, as I just mentioned, 140 attached single-family residential units per the City of Middletown's Development Code, Chapter 1204.07 Zoning District Regulations. The purpose of the PD Plan Development District is to provide an opportunity for creative and flexible land development where a base zoning district will not accommodate the proposed development, but where such development will further the purpose of the code and the goals and policies of the master plan that we just saw. So the PD district is designed to allow for deviations from certain zoning district or standards that would otherwise apply if not contrary to the general spirit and intent of the development code. Next slide. I'm not going to read all that for you, but these are the different criteria that the planning commission and then you will use to determine whether or not you will approve the preliminary development plan and zoning map amendment. Next slide. Public notice requirement per the Middletown Development Code, Table 1226-1, notice requirements. They were, this was published in the paper as well as letters sent to all property owners within 200 feet of the property. We did not receive any comments for this development. Other city department comments. We do have an internal review committee that looked at this proposal. That committee consists of the city manager, assistant city manager, community and economic development department, public works, engineering division. And the only comment that we had here is from the engineering division that the construction plans need to comply with the engineering manual design, grading, stormwater, utilities, erosion control, traffic, etc. Next slide. And then the Planning Commission's recommendation was that the Planning Commission voted to approve the preliminary development plan and map amendment. As a part of this request, the Planning Commission approved a waiver for reduction in the required number of street trees, along with the following waivers: 1210.03A2A, the building orientation; 1210.03A2C, roofs and projections; 1210.03A2B, building materials; 1210.03A2E, mass and scale. I'm not going to read each one of those. And then the Planning Commission did deny a request for a waiver regarding 1210.03A2B regarding the building materials for this development. Next slide. I believe that's it. We do have the applicant here if you have any specific questions.
Thank you. Applicant, would you like to come to the podium? And please do state your name.
Address and confirm the fact you're sworn in too, please.
Alex Batch with Bear Becker, 1404 Race Street, Cincinnati, Ohio. Thank you, Ashley, for the great presentation. I don't want to be too repetitive here, but I do want to add a few notes to that. The comprehensive plan allows for townhouses to be a secondary use in the district that they propose as part of the future land use. When you look at the site in context, we think this use works really well when you think about the more higher intensity commercial land to the north and the single family residential to the south. There's a multifamily development on the western side of Town Boulevard. We think that serves as a nice transition between those two uses, as a nice buffer area. We think there's a need for this type of housing in the Middletown area, and also as part of the design process. You saw the plan. Is it possible to go back?
Do you mind, Matt, going back to the site plan? It's a few slides back. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You can see the dark orange townhouses. There's 12 of them along Town Boulevard. Those are rear-loaded units, so that when you're driving or walking along Town Boulevard, you'll see the front facade of those units. There will be no garages, so you'll see front porches and front yards, and the garages will be tucked around in the backside. That was in a collaboration effort between the applicant and Nathan and other members of staff, where we originally had all front-loaded units. And they said, well, could we come up with something that's a little bit more aesthetically pleasing along the Town Boulevard there? So came up with the rear-loaded units there. We also have 20% open space on the site. You can see 2 pocket parks up along Town Boulevard as well by the 2 wet ponds you see there on the site plan. And so the aesthetics along Town Boulevard we think are really great with this development. And then the front-loaded units are all in the back, so you can see there's 2 different front-loaded townhouse products, the orange and then the yellow there as well. What that also does, there's 3 different townhouse products, and so there's 3 distinct elevations that each have their own distinct look and character to them, so that it doesn't feel monotonous as you're driving through the development. There's 3 different types there. I also have Adam Christo with me here. He's sitting back there with he's the applicant. Between him and I, we're happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And did you receive any written communications from any residents at all?
No.
No? Okay. So at this point, does anybody have any questions? Sure, Mr. Horn?
Just a couple questions. And then this is preliminary, I understand that. But is there a plan in place for, is an HOA going to be taking care of this area, this neighborhood, these 140 units?
Do you want to take that, Adam? Yeah.
Sir, have you been sworn in? I can fix that for you real quick. Do you swear that everything that you're about to say will be true and accurate to the best of your knowledge and belief? Great. So if you'll just give your name, address, that'd be great.
Sure. Adam Christo, 7594 Tyler's Place Boulevard, Westchester, Ohio. Yes, this will be all fully managed by an HOA, as well as the exterior lawn and landscaping.
Okay, next question. So this wasn't land that we sold to you. And a lot of times we can control the narrative of that. But our question always is are these going to be owner occupied, or do you have any type of wording in there that they have to be owner occupied for a decade or so?
I mean, these are all,
I understand they're condos.
yeah, they're individually parceled for sale units. So they're not going to be listed, for rent. Now, if someone chooses, like as a mix, if someone has a vacation home in XYZ, if they want to be able to do that, and it's at least 12 months, we usually allow that, because that's just usually certain people that live part-time in the year in these type of homes where they're fully managed usually might have a need based on affordability to be able to have that option.
Yeah, I understand that. You understand our concern, plus you have an apartment complex right across the street from you. And what we're trying to do is all developments, we're trying to encourage people to be owner-occupied. Even when some people are snowbirds and they maybe rent it out for that amount of time, they're going to be taking care of it. But for whatever reason, at times people who own properties, they take a little bit better care of them than when they rent them. And we're trying to get out of the business of renters. Since we have plenty of them, we actually have another huge apartment complex across the interstate. I know when we control the narrative, we can say this is part of the contract. We're just trying to encourage people who do developments to try to encourage owner-occupied properties versus turning them into rentals almost immediately.
Well, if that was the case, I mean, we very well could have went for strictly a multifamily development here. The reason we're sub-parceling every unit is independently owned is because this is a for sale owner product. And to address your concern about upkeep and maintenance, that's why we have an HOA. And I think if you see the lengths we go through in those documents that require constant upkeep, require the same paint, it's got to be in constant good repair. If not, the HOA has the authority and will go in and make those repairs and then assess that property owner. It's only in the terms of our interest and the other property owners that none of that we would allow any of that to occur. So they're very, very good HOA documents. We've been doing this for 40 years, so we make sure our communities don't decline.
And I appreciate that portion of it, that there is an HOA involved. We see other cities that have, let's just say 80% of their whole city their neighborhoods are HOAs. And it just makes that the requirements that your home will be kept up or there will be consequences. So it kind of balances itself out. I just have to say that because we really want people to come live here and own here. It's their choice, like you said, once they own the property, if they want to rent it half the year out or however they want to do it. And it'll still be the exterior will still be maintained on the outside, but we want the insides also to be maintained like you own it.
In addition, the price point of these, I mean, anything any more new is pretty incredible for even the rental equation even to work. I mean, when these get built, these will be almost 400,000, and I don't know anyone that's usually 1% is going to be paying, why we give $4,000, $3,500 a month for rent. So I mean, just the price point of these product individually parceled, and being self-managed, I think all will relate to a very nice community.
Okay, so these, each one of these condos are gonna be 400 grand a piece?
But right now, the 2 bedrooms, they'll be pushed up to, I mean, with options and, flooring, they'll be pushing up to 350, probably start at 350. When they get built, we're projecting another, probably year and a half. The other condos we have in other municipalities, they're starting right about 300, so be comparable. I mean, prices are insane. Affordability is a real crisis right now.
I'm in the construction trade, I understand inflation, just, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? He will be coming back up. We'll have another opportunity if we have any more questions, but any other questions or comments at this time for Ms. Christo? Okay, thank you. At this time, we'd like to hear anybody who has comments in support. If you raise your hand, if anybody wants to speak in support of this project. Okay, seeing none. If there are any neutral comments, please raise your hand. Seeing none, and we'll go on to if anybody who wants to speak opposed to this project. Okay. Seeing none, Mr. Christo or Mr. Betch, did you want to come up one more time, or are you good? Okay. Then at this time, we will go ahead and close the public comments for the evening. And this does conclude the public comment portion of the public hearing. So now we'll just move on to council deliberations. There will not be any interruptions at this time, although we do encourage you to stay through the end because there will be no further public comment. Council, it's time for us to deliberate. Any comments or questions or discussion? No? Okay. Well, I just want to say that I appreciate this. Thank you very much. A couple of things I was just interested in as well, knowing that this is on I-75, right backing up to that, I'm interested in the opportunity for noise reduction possibilities. That might be something to talk about. And I was also interested in the possibility of more trees, but I'm very happy about this, so thank you. And Mr. Yoder, does there need to be a vote at this point?
Yeah, this is what we've talked about quite a few meetings ago, and one you almost did dwell a couple meetings ago. You deliberate and then just vote, and then we will take what you actually vote on tonight, reduce it to a resolution that we'll put on a future agenda for this board to consider.
Okay, so do we have a motion to approve this development for JA development?
Motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded. Mrs. Skank, would you please call the roll?
Mr. West,
Yes.
Mr. Horn,
Yes.
Mayor Slamka,
Yes.
Mrs. Carter,
Yes.
Mr. Farrell.
Yes.
All right, the yeses have it, the motion passes. That concludes our first public hearing for the evening. We will continue on with our second. This is an amendment to a development plan case 624 to request by, well, I'll let you do this. So please, Mrs. Combs.
Sure. This is a request by applicant David Cambernay, but originally it is Tammy George. You notice that this name got entered somehow, but Tammy George is actually the applicant on behalf of Oak Street Health for approval of an amendment to a development plan at 4778 Roosevelt Boulevard, known as parcel ID Q65420550000042. The property is a total of 2.1030 acres per the Middletown development, per the City of Middletown's zoning map and Middletown Development Code. The property is zoned O1P plan development and would not permit for the proposed office medical use that's proposed, and this would cause you to have an amendment to the plan development. This is a picture of the space. As you can see, one of the tenant spaces next door is Harbor Freight, which is relatively new. Next slide. I already mentioned this is zoned O1P. The P indicates the plan development. Staff understands that this was originally approved in the 1980s to allow for office space and retail. This current request was not ever mentioned in the original plan development of medical office space. This is considered a major change because it alters the mix and combinations of land uses. So that requires both Planning Commission and City Council approval to move forward. Per the applicant, Oak Street Health is a primary care center for Medicare-aged adults. The tenant space includes consultation rooms, offices, exam rooms, and community room for meetings and small events. The building will not be changed on the outside, but only will be interior. And they have stated, and we have checked, that there is adequate parking in the current development to meet the medical office. You can see that there is a zoning map there, and the little arrow indicates where that would be located in the development. Next slide. I've already mentioned this. This is the changes to approved plan developments within the Middletown Development Code. Again, major change because it's adding a use that was not originally approved. Next slide. So we're looking at the comprehensive plan for 2022, and this is neighborhood mixed use, and it does recognize that medical would be an approved use in that mixed use area. Next slide. So public notice was sent to all property owners within 200 feet of the property. We did not receive any comments, and it was published in the paper. We did not have any other city department comments, and the Planning Commission's recommendation was to unanimously approve the added use of medical to 4778 Roosevelt Boulevard to amend that plan development.
Thank you. And you said we did not receive any comments?
I did not.
Thank you very much. Do we have the applicant here or anybody to speak on behalf of the applicant? No. Okay. At this point, is there anybody who would like to speak in support of this project? Seeing none, we'll move on. Anybody who wants to speak in a neutral comment? Seeing none, we'll move on. Is there anybody who would like to be speaking in opposition? Seeing none, we will go ahead and move on and go ahead and close the public comment of this hearing. So this does conclude the public comment portion of this public hearing. Moving on, we will go to the council deliberations. Again, there are no interruptions at this point. Council, any comments, questions, or deliberations?
I mean, my only concern is whenever you change something and allow medical in there that, you know, they say it's going to be for, you know, Grandma Nancy to come in there and use her Medicaid or Medicare, and then in 2 or 3 years, it's a Suboxone clinic. But that's my concern. You know, so whenever you make the decision to allow medical, you have to think about down the road. I mean, I don't know. What was Planning Commission's thoughts on this?
I just say, we do have one of the members from
Yeah.
the Planning Commission that could come forward if you.
That's really my only concern. I see Mr. Morse here, but you know.
Public comment is
Yeah.
over, so can we allow that?
It's atypical to have a planning commission member attend a council meeting or a BZA member and speak on behalf of planning commission.
Just to answer
or BZA.
questions.
If they want to give whatever they want to say in their personal capacity, they certainly can. I see no harm in it, but.
And so that'd be fine during this section, and we need to go ahead and swear him in. Would you like to speak, Mr. Moore? Okay, we'll go ahead and swear you in.
Perfect.
Todd Moore, 1808 Sherm Drive. Yeah, I'll answer any questions I can.
That's usually just my only concern whenever we look at zoning, a zoning change to medical, is that there might be good intentions up front, but further down the road, you know.
I'm only speaking on behalf of myself, but as we reviewed this case.
I'm sorry, would you mind speaking into the microphone, please? Thank you.
I don't know, the microphone on?
Yes.
Looking at this case, I think if you looked at we reviewed the major change, so what we're looking at here is whether or not, and I think the original development was back in the 1980s.
Mm-hmm.
They haven't had, Oak Street provided, I think, a very strong plan. My understanding, and Ashley may be able to point this out, but I mean, making this change as a major change, these types of businesses were in the original plan from the 1980s. There was some office or medical that was proposed in the site. There had not been anything since the 1980s. This being a major change, the scope and scale of what was being provided and its impact on the community, we believed it would be a good fit for this particular location. And again, keep in mind that it was part of that 1980s original vision for this, but to answer your question, I mean, there's always legal and other remedies to address any potential uses, but I would certainly speak in favor. I think what they're proposing for the community will have great impact, so I'll close there, but hopefully that answers your
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
I've been to several Oak Health clinics, and it remained for adults, mainly elderly. And we have 1, 2, 3 recent drug treatment programs added in the area. Roosevelt, Brill, and these are new, so they wouldn't need that space for Suboxone. I think the Oak Street would be a great idea to be right there. People have access to it, bus line, and they can get there.
Yeah, that was my concern, is that we've seen, I think in the last 12 to 24 months, correct me if I'm wrong, 3 new ones open?
Yeah.
So, at some point you have to go, all right, is this legit or not?
Yeah,
You know?
this is a clinic. This is
Okay.
a legit. There's one that's in the neighborhood of where my husband was raised in Dayton, and I went there because I said, "Oh, this is new," and it's inside of a mall where they got they sell clothes, Family Dollar, and Oak Street sits right there.
Okay, perfect.
Any other comments or deliberation from council? All right. Hearing none, then we will go ahead and continue. And we'll go ahead with the vote. Okay. So do we have a motion to approve the project?
Motion.
And is there a second?
Second.
It has been properly moved and seconded. Ms. Skank, would you please call the roll?
You're gonna have to tell me who made the first motion. I'm sorry. It was cloudy to me.
Steve was first.
Steve, I'm
and
sorry.
Zach was second. Yeah.
Thank you. All right. Mr. Horn,
Yes.
Mayor Slamka,
Yes.
Mr. Farrell,
Yes.
Mrs. Carter,
Yes.
Mr. West.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, the yeses have it, and that motion passes.
And can I interrupt to ask a clarifying question as to the first public hearing motion that you all passed? It occurred to me after the fact, I wish I would have thought of it then, that Planning Commission recommended approval subject to their continued compliance with the building material standards. Correct me if I'm wrong. Your motion just said approve. I don't know if you intended for it to incorporate Planning Commission's recommendation that they not be granted an exception to the building material requirements or so.
My understanding was that we were voting on as it was presented by the Planning Commission here. So was that everybody's understanding?
Correct. Yes.
Okay, so it was a motion to approve the recommendation of Planning Commission. Thank you.
Certainly. All
And
right.
I'll get better at that as we move on and do it our new ways.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so then we will now continue with our final public hearing for the evening. And Mrs. Combs, will you be doing the staff report?
Yes.
Thank you.
Next slide, please. Okay. So this is a public hearing for the Middletown Development Code text amendments for sections 1204.08, 1230.02, 1210.02, and 1210.03. So text amendment number 1 applies to chapter 1204 zoning districts and use regulations, specifically 1204.08 permitted principal uses. So the request is staff request to change table 1204-3 principally permitted uses to include the categories of medical marijuana and adult use cannabis. So the recommendation was that Planning Commission unanimously voted to modify Exhibit A, 1204.08, table 1204-3 for both adult use cannabis operations and medical marijuana operations to 1, that they would be conditionally uses, which I'm talking about, I'm sorry, I'm having a difficulty seeing the screen here, it's a little bit fuzzy. So 1, cultivation facilities be conditional uses in the B3, I1, and I2 zoning districts. Dispensaries be conditional uses in the B2 and B3 zoning districts, and processors be conditional uses in the B3, I1, and I2 zoning districts. So the definitions, 1230.02 definitions, staff request to add the current definitions in collaboration of the text amendment for medical marijuana and adult use cannabis use categories. The recommendation was that Planning Commission voted to approve what was presented to them, and that's going to be on these next slides that I'm going to show you. So next slide, please. So the top is what was presented to Planning Commission. It's kind of hard to see, but as you can see what I read to you, Planning Commission recommended to change specific zoning districts to conditional, which is on the bottom so that you can compare the two. And then Exhibit B there off to the right was approved as presented with the definitions. So and this was specifically for medical marijuana facilities. And the next one mirrors the same with the conditional uses. So next slide. So these were the adult use cannabis operations, and they were recommended by Planning Commission to have the same conditional use categories for the zoning that I've already mentioned. Next slide. I don't know if you wanted to go through these individually, or you want me to just roll through?
I'm fine to go through them collectively.
Okay, so text amendment number 2 applies to chapter 1210, architectural standards. So the request was staff request to change 1210.02B to remove the requirement of planned developments to receive approval from the Architecture Review Board after the Planning Commission and City Council have approved the final development plan. So the Planning Commission recommendation here was Planning Commission unanimously approved the text amendment as presented. They discussed the necessity of this text amendment because the plan development process eliminates the need for review by the Architecture Review Board, since it consists of members from both Planning Commission and City Council who've already reviewed the plan developments. So it's going to add what you see in yellow. So buildings in the I-1 and I-2 districts and those in approved development plans shall be exempt from this chapter. Text amendment number 3, chapter 1210, architectural standards. 1210.03 architectural standards for residential buildings. The request here from staff was to change 1210.03 architectural standards for residential buildings to architectural standards B, building materials, to remove the section that dictates facade materials on the residential dwelling when visible from a public street. The Planning Commission unanimously approved the text amendment as presented. They discussed changing the code so that vinyl cannot be used on any facade visible from any street, public or private. The Commission noted that the developments can still request variances from this code section through plan development review processes, but they wanted to keep the standards high. So what you see is being removed is highlighted with the strike through that when such facades are visible from a public street. So that would indicate all. Next. And then the final text amendment applies to 1204 zoning districts and use regulations, the permitted principal uses. So staff requests to change table 1204-3 principally permitted uses to remove residential uses from the BC subdistricts with the exception of BCR, which is residential. So the Planning Commission recommendation, they unanimously voted to approve the text as presented. They discussed that text amendments intend to preserve and protect land on the east end for development. They also discussed the Renaissance Point project and the land remaining east of I-75. The Commission determined that prohibiting residential uses would add a layer of protection and allow for thoughtful development strategies by both Planning Commission and City Council. The Commission discussed that residential development still could be requested in these zoning districts, again, through that development plan review process. And that concludes the staff report there.
Thank you very much.
And then, as you can see, this would be the review criteria they would use for this text amendment and the others.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Combs. Because we do have 4 different text amendments we're looking at, I think what we'll do is just break it up into comments from the public, number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, but we'll vote on everything all together. Does that make sense, Mr. Yoder?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So at this point, if we can go back maybe to look at the first text amendment so we can discuss that. And Ms. Combs, did the city receive any written communications about this first one?
We did not.
Okay. And now, if we have anybody who would like to speak in support of this first text amendment, please do state your name and address, and that you've been sworn in.
Thank you very much. Todd Moore, 1808 Sherm Drive. Good evening.
Oh, just verify that you've been sworn in, please. Please verify that you've been sworn in.
I have been.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mayor Slank and members of council, I'm here tonight. I'll speak as a resident of the city. I'm asking that you give consideration to the Planning Commission's recommendation to place some restrictions on medical marijuana businesses. If staff could move to the second slide to show the table. I'm speaking for, yes.
I think he's up here to speak for what has been proposed,
I'm not asking for any changes as presented. Yeah, as presented,
what the planning commission approved.
yes. In the original table, if you see at the top, which is very difficult to see, one of the challenges that you see in that table is you see a map of Ps, permitted use. Permitted use by its definition means permitted by right. So in terms of planning commission or any oversight, there would be no oversight if we were to accept the table in totality. And one of the issues that you run into there is that we would essentially be accepting that marijuana businesses have no adverse impacts anywhere in the city or anywhere within the code. So one of the challenges that I see within the current table was we have to have some reasonable regulatory structure in place. Otherwise, we would be an outlier in the state of Ohio. Essentially, we treat medical marijuana businesses, cultivation or processing, unlike any other city in Ohio. That's not an overstatement. Those are the facts. If you look at the Moritz Law chart, which you've probably seen some of those listed in the table, those that are in the moratorium stage or even those that are legally permitted, the table that's presented there essentially means that there is no regulatory structure except a couple areas. So I want to repeat, we would be an outlier in the state of Ohio if we were accepted that table. So what's proposed, if you look at the bottom chart, is you see that most of what's been presented by staff is kept intact except for a few key areas. Now, I wanted to also address this table in terms of just police powers. When you think about your police powers, you think about your ability to regulate health, safety, welfare, or morals of a community. If we accepted the top table, we're essentially waiving our police powers. Again, we're saying there are no adverse impacts. There is nothing for us to worry about. Let's accept it. Let's go for it. There's no issues. Again, we'd be an outlier in the state of Ohio if that's where we're at. What I see in this table presented in the bottom is, again, trying to place a reasonable structure in place. The majority of the table stays intact except for a couple key areas. I'm going to point those out to you now. So if you look at B2 and B3, which would be, these would be for the dispensaries themselves. B2 is looking at your community business district, B3, the general business district. These are the areas that are going to have the highest visibility. So what you're saying there is, as opposed to permitted by right, so if a business owner is aggrieved that you're doing this, they're just going to take it to court. Whereas a conditional use, they would have a public hearing as you're having here tonight. It would come before Planning Commission, they would hold a hearing, ask questions, and it would come before you. You would always have the final say. It doesn't remove anything from that process, but what it does allow is a safety valve. So if there's a business or there's a community member that's within these districts and they have a problem with what's being proposed, it doesn't take your ability away to say we're going forward regardless. But what this would do is it allows us to hold a hearing, listen to those who are aggrieved, listen to our residents if they don't like what's being proposed, find out why, or to create a better market through the process so that we're able to ask questions and determine whether or not that is the best business for us in a public forum, as opposed to staff just making that decision for the rest of us who are paying taxes to the city. So I think it creates a nice mechanism for council to have a final say, but it also allows our residents to have a say in the process itself, which I think is very important. So you see that in the B2 district, the B3 district, again, it's proximity to residential neighborhoods. That's one of the reasons why I think that's important, is its proximity to residential neighborhoods, and whether or not that residents or business owners may feel that they have something to say about what's being proposed. Again, you maintain final approval. Doesn't take that away. Let's go forward to I2 and I1 and I2. I1 and I2, the reason for that was, again, this is the industrial areas, and you may think, well, what's the issue there? Well, it's cultivation and processing. So there, what we're looking at is conditional. It's the same rationale, but one of the issues that you would see, you study the issue long enough, when we're thinking about cultivation and processing, You start pumping a bunch of water into a processing site, you get smells. You're growing a lot of marijuana there. Not all of these are going to be producing adverse impacts. I don't want to make that argument, okay? There are many of our neighbors who may have cultivation sites and maybe they don't have a problem. But you see in the literature that there are many that do. They're not all created equal. Not all these businesses are going to operate at the highest standard, okay? So under this particular proposal, when you're looking at cultivation and processing, we get to ask questions. What's your filtration systems? What types of business? We go through the public hearing, just like we're doing here. We ask those questions. One of the issues that you often find is that with cultivation and processing, if those filtration systems are not where they should be or they're not quality, you know, do you want that pumped into your backyard? You would like to know what that level of business is. What type of practices is this business bringing to Middletown? I think a public hearing is important. And again, it's not so much just the location, but its potential impact on a residential community. Whether or not you're created, because under my understanding is we have council has created 3 medical dual use licenses for Middletown. But there are no limitations when it comes to processing and cultivation. Fine, at least hold a hearing, okay? Because in this particular situation, if you get something in here that's permitted by right, there is no public hearing, and then you wind up with a residential neighborhood potentially that's impacted, and then it's going to be coming before you, and it's going to go to court. Here you release that tension through a public hearing, as we're doing right here. We're standing, we're asking questions, we go through the public hearing process. And again, it does not remove any power from you. You get the final say in this process. So I just wanted to point that out to you, and I wanted to mention, again, just in closing, again, permitted by right, as in that first table, that's staff making those decisions. We don't have our community input in that process. Conditional use does not remove your ability, but it does hold a hearing, and it's located only in areas that have the potential impact for residential neighborhoods. That's the key difference here. It's impact on a community. So when you think about this, and I pulled this for you, a conditional use is that which has a potential impact on the immediate neighborhood, okay? Conditional use requires review, location, special impacts against specific standards, the desirability of permitting the establishment on a particular site. Let me reference one other thing before I close here. In our code itself, when we get into the conditional use criteria, okay? And this is in our code. One of the things it talks about here, number 7, review criteria under a conditional use. The proposed use talks about the general welfare or excessive production of smoke, fumes, or odors. Odors. Okay, so what I'm trying to argue here is that we have protection in the code to at least ask questions, hold a public hearing, hold the businesses who come to Middletown accountable, and really just try to create a reasonable structure as opposed to what truly would be one of the broadest, if not the broadest regulatory structure in the state. So I would hope that you would keep those things take those things into consideration as we try to move our way through this issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Is there anyone else who would like to speak in support? No? Okay, hearing none, we will continue. Any neutral comments at this time? No. And anybody who would like to speak in opposition? Okay, seeing none, this will conclude the public comment portion of the public hearing. Now it's just up for council to deliberate. Are there any comments or questions for council? Mr. Horn?
Okay. First of all, here, I'll ask the law department first. This is regulated by the state of Ohio, meaning that they have rules and regulations for all of this. In other words, they say, if you're going to do this, if you're going to sell medical marijuana and now combine it with recreational marijuana, there are rules that you have to comply with. You just cannot, as I jokingly say, go down on Central, get a storefront, and put a Bob Marley poster up and start selling medical marijuana. There are regulations. Is that accurate?
There are regulations, one of which is that you must comply with any zoning laws. There's no zoning-based regulatory scheme included within the state's regulatory scheme.
Okay.
They provide deference to the local government as to where these may be allowed and upon what terms. So whether permitted, conditionally, prohibited, et cetera.
Correct. But again, this is from my research and from all the information I've looked up on this is probably even more regulated concerns about the sale of this, probably even more than a person who wants to open up a gun shop, which is federally regulated through the FFL. So that's when comments are made like, we got to do this and we have to make sure that the citizens are aware and everything else. It's almost like we are being, we're just doing this just for fun. We're just doing this, and I find it insulting, one of the comments that just was made, that our city workers here are not as concerned without the comments of the citizens. That's what they do. They work a full-time job here for our citizens. They are daily working here, not just 40 hours a week. They're working for our citizens and making sure that our citizens are safe, that we have first responders, that we have the ability for people to want to live here. And I find it insulting when someone says, well, staff just makes this recommendation and they're not getting the input from the citizens. That's what they do. That's what they're trying to do for this city. The thought process of, well, you know, if they're going to do any type of manufacturing and all these other things about smells and water and everything and regulations, well, we have a steel mill here and we have a paper plant here. And I've lived here my whole life. I'm used to the smell, even though it's clean pollution. I'm not saying that we should allow our water to be polluted by a cultivator or a manufacturer, but again, there are regulations, there are rules, there are processes that have to be maintained, and not just, again, some guys who have $4 million who want to open up on a tilt-up out by Pilot Chemical because they have 1 million square feet and don't care what their neighbors say. These are processes. This is not something that is just being done just because someone can. I remember some comments of, well, we don't want someone buying 10 acres of a bean field and growing marijuana. It's like, no, you wouldn't have that because you'd have night farmers. The cultivation actually has to be inside of a building. And it's just, again, we do our best to think these processes through. We do our best to make sure that we're trying to do what's best for the citizens. And this team and all their support, they are doing their best with what they're given. And when they present something, they didn't just say, oh, we got to get a spreadsheet out and it's 4:30 and we got a meeting at 5:30, so let's just pump this out. These things are thought out well, and the research is done. Now, am I saying that we do not want citizens' comment? No, not at all. We want to have them to have their say, but there's another reason why we have elections. Not for me, everyone else. And we are representing what the citizens want because they want to do something else, and that's why they vote for people. So, and I appreciate what all this that has come forward, this text amendment number 1, which was brought by the law director, not by me, but I was asked to support it, as I always will do, to support this team and help educate the citizens to try and do the best we can under the circumstances that we had. That's why we said 3 dispensaries. And again, they're going to have to go through zoning, they're going to have to go through the state, they're going to have to go through the city before they're allowed to distribute this to our citizens. And again, like I said, and I'll close with this, it is a choice. Just like people decide to drink alcohol, smoke cigarettes, and eat fast food. It's a choice. You don't have to do this if you don't want to.
Thank you, Mr. Horn. Are there any other comments or questions from the rest of council? No? Okay, I wanted to say a couple things as well. We did receive a letter from a Mr. Jason Umberg speaking to a certain location that was in, I believe, one of the B sub-districts. And the concerns were that it's close to several schools, residential. We had just heard about the proximity to residential and how the conditional delineation might help to be able to be heard and speak about what you want to go in certain zoning areas. Looking at the zoning map, for example, I think one of the places, and this is both, please answer this is for both medical and adult use, correct? These zoning maps. There are two of them included in the packet. So right now we're looking at adult use and the other one was, right. And I think they're pretty much exactly the same.
And you can also, I can't actually make out what that table says there, but yes, there's a definitional sections for adult use and medical marijuana.
So we're looking at both of them tonight.
Correct.
And I can understand the concerns, and some of these zones, it looks like maybe might be better not to allow, but I like the compromise of conditional use, especially in, for example, 01. Our Middletown High School, I believe, and our Middletown Middle School are both in 01, I believe, if that's correct. So I can understand why people might want to have that conversation if somebody's going to be wanting to put a business there. So I'm in favor of the conditional uses. In fact, I think it'd be nice to see them for all of the areas, especially for like the urban core sub-district, the UCS. I know we're trying to do a lot for our revitalization of the downtown area, and it might be best not to have, I know it's not permitted in the UCC, the core itself, but I'm definitely in favor of the conditional uses. I think that works.
Ben, we can't use it downtown because don't we have that moratorium? We can't have anything medical downtown.
Oh, for medical use.
Therein lies a question of what constitutes a medical office building versus what constitutes a medical marijuana retail establishment. And I don't believe that a medical marijuana retail establishment would constitute a medical office building because they're not providing medical services on site to patients.
I thought that
There's a prohibition of medical uses in the downtown district.
And I thought what happened was we had a pharmacy where Triple Moon was. When he moved, the city council kind of made a decision, okay, we do not want a clinic there, not to insult anybody, but a clinic that helps
Correct.
treat that. So I thought medical marijuana because the medical side, you actually have to have a prescription from a doctor or a card.
But there's no medical services or anything that are being provided on site. No different than you could have a Walgreens downtown.
Okay.
Well, you can't have a little clinic in it that would be providing those medical services on site. Likewise, if you had a Walgreens downtown, someone would have to get a prescription to be able to go there and pick it up.
Okay.
But they're not having any medical services provided on site.
So then the prohibition of having a treatment clinic downtown is still prohibited?
Absolutely.
Is that what I'm trying to get to?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, and the urban core district, like that Central Avenue and Main Street, it looks like it's prohibited per this chart anyway. So I was speaking mostly of the support district right next to it. We don't have the map. It would be helpful to see it so you could kind of visualize it.
Isn't it 500 feet though? From any residential or church or school?
Yes.
So it's 500 feet from any residential, any church or school.
I thought that's why I was asking about regulations that they already had in place, that we were going to take on the state's regulations, which is 500 feet. So that kind of pigeonholes, because when you look at the map that we had, it looked like measles, but it wasn't all in all areas where it's going to be near someone's backyard or anything like that, because they had boxes where you could put it and boxes where you cannot put it, because you had to be that 500 feet off from all these different areas for the restrictions.
One of the things I looked at from this letter, this is a really well thought out letter, and what he did is he had signatures from 80 residents in that area on the 122 site, or I'm sorry, the Route 122 site. But the bigger conversation was zoning, right? What's allowed in certain zones. And one of the biggest conversations, and I'd like to speak about this because it was a concern, and these are some of the concerns that residents are sending through, was that it's proximity to schools. So like there's Middletown Christian, yes.
Yeah, if I may, okay. And I know Mr. Umberg very well, and I respect his opinion on this, but where the dispensary is intending on going, that's not going to cause traffic. What might cause traffic is the fact that there's 2 hospitals right there, and we just broke ground on a $240 million multi-use facility. The proximity to schools, Fenwick High School, where my daughter goes, is thousands of yards up the road. Same with Middletown Christian down Union. This is the issue when we look at adding additional local red tape layers on state regulations, is there will be, and especially with something that's as spicy as marijuana, period. So you have to look at it from a neutral ground and go, this right here is a perfect example. So you think a dispensary right there with a very small footprint, it's going to be similar to, the ones that are in other areas around us. They think that's going to cause a traffic jam. Okay. That makes zero sense to me. There's more traffic at Waffle House than there would be from this dispensary. I mean, what are they going to do when Renaissance Point opens? What do they do about Atrium? What do they do about Kettering right now? This is where I see some more. 9 times out of 10, when it comes to something like marijuana, especially, and as a council, we've discussed this many times, and there's just heated arguments on both ends. But at the end of the day, if somebody has an actual logical viewpoint against it, like when Mr. Moore was speaking and saying, hey, look, here's some things to think about. Okay, let's pause, let's think about it in a logical sense. But when somebody is trying to convince me that at a major intersection that a dispensary is going to just cause traffic jams, I go, all right, you lost me there, because what are you going to do when Renaissance Point opens? What are you going to do when the new fire station opens right there? This is not going to be the cause of traffic jams. It's not close to schools. Again, the state regulates that. It's not even remotely close to schools. It's not even, you can't even see a school from here, let alone it be a 500-foot easement. You can't even see a school. So again, I'll take any time to listen to, any viewpoint, but again, I always kind of look at this when we add conditions in there, it could potentially cause a future council to steer away from what could be a potentially good project. For example, processors and cultivation facilities, yeah, there are a lot of other areas that have some conditional uses, but when we look at the map specifically to Middletown, where these facilities could potentially go, it's sort of limited in a sense. And now I won't go as far as what Councilman Horn said, but I find most of the time in this city, there are a lot of things that will open, or a lot of businesses that have been around for generations. I'm not going to call it any specific businesses, that have and currently have or recently had significant environmental consequences, not only on the surrounding communities, but the city as a whole, and nobody will bat an eye at them. But if a cultivation facility, which is a clean facility that's regulated wants to come in, they'll act like it's the worst thing in the world and they're not eating McDonald's every day. So I just find there's this viewpoint of marijuana as being something that we want but we don't want. We're always going to place more burden of proof on the applicant than we would taking 30 prescription medications a day. So I appreciate Mr. Moore's explanation of this, because it is something that we really need to think about. I mean, there are a lot of other cities that had been a bit more aggressive than we have been, but at the same time, you know, and I read through the letter that we received today, and I'm like, there's just no, I mean, you lost me at traffic. You lost me.
That was one of the items in his letter, just so people can be aware.
Yeah.
Thank you. And so what I was looking at was the zoning overall, and that conversation that was brought up about conditional use. I do appreciate that because it does at least allow for that conversation to happen. It adds for another layer of protection. And especially because we're looking at adult use and medical dispensaries in particular, and also with the cultivation, if there is that aroma issue as well. I think it's useful to have the conditional use on those two specifically, perhaps in all of the locations. So that's what I'd be fine with the conditional use, because it still allows it. We know that the people voted for it for both medical and for adult use, but then it also does add that layer of protection, which I appreciate.
One thing that stood out to me was there weren't any conditional recommendations for testing labs.
There aren't allowed, I believe, by law. Is that correct, Mr. Yoder?
To be honest, I'm not 100% sure on that point. I don't know the answer to that. I can find out.
Yeah, I thought that's what was talked about before. I don't think, yeah, I noticed that too, and I think that's why.
Is that why? Yeah.
Not allowed to have.
Thank you. Mr. Moore, I think, is saying that's correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry, what was that? What did he say?
I believe you said ORC 3780, that's prohibited, were his words.
To have the regulation.
I've not been so concerned on that in the context that it's not related to any of the zoning amendments I've dealt with yet.
Right. So I think the conversation's really on dispensaries and then cultivation,
Correct.
secondly. Mm-hmm. But that's why I kind of like, because it is a hot button issue, I do like the added protection, especially if it comes to suing the city. I'd like, a public hearing, I think, is a better step.
Can I ask you a question on that, Mayor?
Certainly.
When you look at the potential suing of the city, what do you think sounds worse? Would it be that the business was allowed to come in per our regulation, or the fact of they come to council then specifically tells this specific business that they can come in and then something happens with them? My opinion, maybe I'm wrong, and I'm not an attorney, but I feel like if we were specifically allowing one specific business to come in versus just the zoning regulations, then we are more or less wanting them to come in, and then if something bad would happen, I think that would actually probably look worse on us. So, I don't know, just a thought.
I can speak to that since that is a legal question. And just actually, I'll give my 2 points of clarification now. One was, respectfully, Councilman Horn's comment that this was proposed by the law department. Text amendments can only be proposed by a property owner. It's more for map amendments. Property owner, council, or planning commission. So council is actually, if you recall, the body that initiated the first draft of this that went to planning commission. So I just want to make sure the law department has no dog in this hunt. You guys do with it as you may.
Clarification, this
Yeah.
is why I was accused of not getting my way, and this was not my legislation. You and I
Sure.
discussed it.
Sure, we
So
did
sorry
put
for throwing
together
you
the
under the
first.
bus.
Yeah, no, that's completely fine. The other clarification is conditional uses. Those actually just go to planning commission. And then if someone doesn't like that, then they can appeal that up to court as an administrative appeal. And I mention that just so you'll know, if you do make things conditionally permitted, the reviewing body for the city, the last word would be planning commission on that. If they got an adverse decision, that could be appealed up to a court of law. Now, to answer your question, if something is permitted as a matter of right, so long as they comply with the setback or the dimensional regulations, staff is required to issue them that permit, whether they want to or not. I'm not aware of instances in any of my practice, frankly, where someone has demonstrated that they comply with all of the dimensional regulations, they're permitted as a matter of right, and a government entity has nonetheless withheld that certificate. So there's really no exposure on that, unless by chance, God forbid, the city withhold a permit that someone's entitled to as a matter of right. To get more at your question, though, Councilman Farrell, about conditional uses, conditional uses are thought of as uses that are potentially sensitive uses depending on the area within which they could be cited. So a church, or let's say a school or a church in a commercial district might be a permitted use as a matter of right, because it might make most sense to go in a commercial or business district, but in a residential district, a church or a school might not be as compatible. So that's typically, it's an identification that this may or may not be a good fit there. Then when people go, well, how could we approve one conditional use permit for medical marijuana over here, and then how could we deny a conditional use permit for medical marijuana over there? And my answer to that is always, don't worry about precedent. It's about the factors in the code that are listed out for conditional uses. But if all the same factors are satisfied in one instance, it should make you question, well, then why wouldn't you also permit it here? Chances are your gut would say, well, given the context, here's why a conditional use for medical marijuana over here could make sense, and over here, it might not make sense. So so long as the deciding body, Planning Commission on a conditional use, would make rational decisions based off those factors, it's okay for them to say yes in one instance and no in a different. But you need to understand, okay, well, what's different about it to where this should be a yes and that should be a no.
So in your personal
Very long-winded explanation
No,
here.
I understand where you're coming from, and I understand the process towards it. So in your personal opinion, does us P versus C, I mean, does that leave us open for liability as a city if cultivator A comes in and something bad goes wrong and they leak into the Great Miami and get people sick, like God forbid, right?
No change in a P versus a C, and that will increase or decrease the city's exposure to anything. The only thing that it would do is if it's a C, in, let's say, the Planning Commission, not that they would, but they make as the legal standard would be, arbitrary, capricious, or otherwise unsupported decision based off the record, that's what could lead to exposure. But something such as environmental issues or this, that, or the other, no. So just P versus C, there's no legal exposure. That's within your power. The state has said if you want to make them conditional uses, you can. If you want to make them permitted as a matter of right, you absolutely can.
And we're also looking at both medical marijuana and adult use, and if there's a difference for anybody for either one of those charts, as well.
But they're going to be in the same building. We're not
Probably.
We're not going to
Yeah.
separate. And actually, the people who are applying, they are a P1. That's right. Yeah, +1. So you already have to have, like the folks who operate in Monroe or someplace else. They've already been vetted by the state. The state says you're good, but you still got to get your zoning certificate from wherever you're trying to put an establishment. So those folks, and we don't want two medical marijuanas and one recreational. They have to do both at the same building, which only makes sense.
Thank you.
As presently drafted, it's identical adult versus medical for those
Both tables.
8 conditional use Cs on the chart.
So you're saying that it will be medical and recreation in the same building? Is that what you were saying?
The people that I've talked to that are interested, yes, that's what they intend to do. So it's
The state regulatory scheme does contemplate dual licensed marijuana facilities that could be both medical and retail. And to Councilmember Horn's point, so it seems the first licenses for adult use are going to already established medical use facilities.
So would that be considered as one to have two in the
Yeah.
same?
It's one business, and they sell both products in the same business.
Okay, so there's room for two more?
Two more.
Okay.
That does combo, or we'll use that word.
Okay. I was thinking about Mr. Moore talking about the smell. You drive up the street, you smell marijuana. You can get high off driving up Main Street.
That's sitting at
Driving
every
up
streetlight
14.
right now.
The what?
Sitting at every streetlight right now or going to a professional sports games.
Yeah,
I mean, you don't smell nicotine anymore. You see
Right.
somebody have a cigarette and it's weird.
right.
But if they're ripping a THC pen, you're like, oh, that's normal. Who would have ever guessed?
Right.
Is there any more discussion or comments? No? Okay. Well, then that will conclude our council deliberations. So then we will continue on for,
You can do it whichever way you want. If you want to just go ahead and vote now, that's fine by me. We can cobble together the legislation for the text amendments later. Or if you want to hold all of the text amendments for the different sections and
might-
vote on everything.
yeah, it might be
Either way is fine.
useful to separate this one out,
Yeah.
perhaps. So why don't we go ahead and vote for this one alone, and then we can probably look at the.
That's fine, and we'll cobble together the correct legislation based off what your intent is tonight.
Okay. So do we have a motion to, so I think this is how we'll say it, the motion to approve the planning commission's recommendation. We have a motion to approve the planning commission's recommendation. Okay, so I would move to go ahead and, I will move to accept and approve the planning commission's recommendation. Is there a second?
Second?
Okay, it has been properly moved and seconded. Mrs. Skank, please call the roll.
Mayor Slanka?
Yes.
Mr. Farrell?
No.
Mrs. Carter?
Yes.
Mr. West?
No.
Mr. Horn?
No.
The noes have it, and the motion does not pass.
Correct. You're not done though, so now you have
Right.
to see if
Now we have to
anything
go
else
on.
might pass.
So can we please go to number 2? Text amendment number 2, please.
Well, no, I think what you're meaning is you're still deliberating, so you need to see
Oh.
whether there's a majority vote to, I would presume, depending on the votes, if I'm reading it correctly, approve the original proposed text amendment,
Oh, I see what you're saying.
not including the
Got you.
recommendation.
Okay.
Recommended changes by planning commission.
Okay, so now that that has been voted down, is there a motion to approve the original table, or the original tables?
Motion.
Is there a second?
Second?
It has been properly moved and seconded. Mrs. Skank, please call the roll.
Mr. Farrell?
Yes.
Mrs. Carter?
No.
Mr. West?
Yes.
Mr. Horn?
Yes.
Mayor Slanka?
No. The noes have it, the yeses have it, and the motion passes, forgive me. Okay, now we can move on to item number 2. We can go ahead and move the screens, please. So to go back to the public hearing, at this point, we can have anybody who wants to go ahead and speak in favor or in support of the second text amendment. Is there anybody who wishes to speak in favor? Hearing none, is there anybody who wishes to speak in opposition? Hearing none, that will go ahead and conclude the public comment portion of this part of the text amendment. On to council deliberations. Are there any comments or discussion from council? Okay, hearing none, then we'll go on to vote. And do we have, so this is kind of, so I just go ahead and say, do we, is there a motion to approve the second text amendment as written?
Motion.
Is there a second?
Second?
It has been properly moved and seconded. Mrs. Skank, please call the roll.
Mrs. Carter?
Yes.
Mr. West?
Yes.
Mr. Horn?
Yes.
Mayor Slanka?
Yes.
Mr. Farrell?
The yeses have it, and that motion passes. Could we please go on and move on to the text amendment number 3, please? Okay, so is there anybody who would like to speak in support of text amendment number 3? Is there anybody who would like to speak in opposition? Seeing none, that concludes the public comment portion of text amendment number 3. We will move on to council deliberations. Is there anybody from council who would like to make a comment or question?
I will.
Yes, sir. Mr. Horn.
Ashley, can you explain the difference between public and private streets so this makes sense? And then I'll speak on it after that.
Sure. So private streets would be when you have a planned development, those aren't, public. Those are typically private streets. So when you would drive into there right now, private streets, you could essentially have different types of materials on the buildings. When you're from a public street, that's more dictated by our code and what our code is saying. So this text amendment would wipe out public street and it'd be from any street. So those private streets and planned developments would be held accountable to the same standards you see here.
So when I was working with the Planning Commission, it's a shame Mr. Moore left, I don't know why, but we had a discussion about vinyl. And what this does is basically makes it where all new construction, first floor up to the second floor, now has to be it public or private, can no longer be vinyl. All the way wrapped around. Second floor can still be vinyl, but what we're trying to do is we're not trying to hinder or hurt the builders. We're just trying to make better homes. And just some of the conversation of, well, the hardy plank is going to cost an extra 10 grand. Well, if you're getting a loan for 30 years, 10 grand is really not going to hurt you that much. And the interest rates are going down, so that's good. So that's why we're trying to do that. And if you just drive around town, yes, I know some of the vinyl is 20, 30 years old. But again, because we live in an industrial town, my apologies for what I said earlier. I've been here my whole life, and like I said, I just never noticed the smells. But vinyl, if you don't have an HOA and you don't take time to power wash that vinyl, and even over time, you'll even notice that it'll warp if your house happens to face the east or the west and the sun's just pounding on it. So I'm just thinking if we're trying to do all this development, be it for people to own homes or even apartment buildings, that we at least try to get past the vinyl, at least on the first floor. And then after that, they can do what they want. So that's the intent of this, and I worked with the Planning Commission on that. So.
Any other comments or questions from council? And I appreciate that. One of the thoughts that I had was, well, if we're looking for some modestly priced, like that missing middle price point, but again, I really appreciate the fact that we're trying to raise the standards. So if there are no other comments or questions, we will go ahead and proceed. Is there a motion to approve the text amendment number 3?
Motion?
Is there a second?
Second.
It has been properly moved and seconded. Mrs. Skank, please call the roll.
Mr. West?
Yes.
Mr. Horn?
Yes.
Mayor Slanka?
Yes.
Mrs. Carter?
Yes.
Mr. Farrell?
Yes.
The yeses have it. That motion passes. And now can we please move ahead to number 4, the final one? Okay. So is there anybody who would like to speak in support of this text amendment, number 4? Seeing none, anyone from the public who would like to speak in opposition? Seeing none, that will conclude the public portion of this segment, and we'll go on to council deliberations. Are there any questions or comments? Okay. Hearing none, we will proceed to vote. Is there a motion to approve text amendment number 4?
Motion.
Is there a second?
Second?
It has been properly moved and seconded. Mrs. Skank, please call the roll.
Mr. Horn?
Yes.
Mayor Slanka?
Yes.
Mr. Farrell?
Yes.
Mrs. Carter?
Yes.
Mr. West?
Yes.
The yeses have it, and that motion passes. This concludes the third and final public hearing. The next order of business is citizen comments. We have received one comment card this evening, and I would like to call Mr. Abdul Shakur Ahmad to the podium, please. Please state your full name and Middletown residence or work address for the record. You will have 4 minutes of uninterrupted speech. Please commence.
My name is Abdul Shakur Ahmed, 220 Park Manor Drive, Dayton, Ohio. I'd like to say assalamu alaikum, peace be unto you, council and mayor. I'm here to share International Underground Railroad Month, being the month of September. On Friday, 5 p.m. to 9 p.m., and Saturday, 11 a.m. to 3 p.m., September the 6th and the 7th, at the Pendleton Arts Center, 1105 Central Avenue, Middletown, Ohio, that we will observe for the third year this International Underground Railroad Month. Ohio was a free state in the Northwest Territory. Once a freedom seeker crossed the Ohio River, he, she, or they were on the long path to freedom. Slavery was not allowed by law in the Northwest Territory. The banks of the Great and Little Miami Rivers, creeks, and the towpaths of the Miami-Erie Canal were underground railroad routes. The city of Middletown was the hub for this region. Warren and Butler County was abolitionist territory. Abolitionists known as conductors and the black settlement in Middletown were underground railroad stations / safe houses where freedom seekers found safety from bounty hunters seeking cash for their return to enslavement. The freedom seekers were provided food and shelter and clothing and got connected to other safe houses, underground railroad stations, west to Oxford, northwest to West Elkton, northeast to Springboro. State Representative Willis Blackshear Jr., Dayton Democrat, announced on December the 8th, 2021, the Ohio House passage of House Bill 340, which would designate September as International Underground Railroad Month to honor the history of Ohioans who contributed to the Underground Railroad's mission of justice for enslaved people. Woodrow Keon Jr., President and COO of the National Underground Railroad Center, Freedom Center in Cincinnati, said, the Underground Railroad was the nation's first large-scale social justice movement, and its lessons endure as we continue this journey for justice. State Representative Willis Blackshear Jr. of Dayton, Democrat, House Bill 340 was signed into law on Tuesday, June 14, 2022 by Ohio Governor Mike DeWine. His bipartisan legislation with State Representative Adam Byrd, Republican, New Richmond, designates September as International Underground Railroad. This is an incredible day for the 66th House District, the state of Ohio, and all freedom seekers who demonstrate historic resolve, bravery, and determination, Byrd said. When the passage of House Bill 340, we are honoring, preserving, and recognizing the lives and stories of freedom seekers, abolitionists, and those whose names are no longer known and helped involved people escape to freedom. Ohio is the 11th state in the United States in presenting this history, said Representative Blackshear.
Mr. Ahmad, excuse me, I'm so sorry, your 4 minutes is up.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
So Friday and Saturday, Pendleton Arts Center.
Thank you so much. All right, this concludes our public participation. The next agenda item is council comments. We will begin to my left with Councilmember Farrell, followed by Councilmember Carter, and then to my right with Councilmember West, followed by Councilmember Horn, and I will speak last. Mr. Farrell.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Shakur, I actually just showed a house in Franklin, literally on the way here, and it was built in, I think, 1810, second oldest house in Warren County, and they met all the parameters of you know, abolitionist and all that, so they were a part of all this. So it's kind of funny you're down here tonight and that I was showing that house today, so just a fun little fact. I don't really have too much tonight, Mayor. I know it's getting ready to be announced, but we have the community center groundbreaking next Monday. Is that 1:30? Yep, I'll let you. I know you're better at announcing all that than me, so I'll leave that for you. But I'm excited about that. Aquatic Center, that groundbreaking should be soon. And I just wanted to thank the community and thank each of you individually for, obviously I wasn't here a couple weeks ago for the kind of sudden passing of my uncle and everything. And Mayor and Paul, you guys came to the visitation. I really appreciate that. Steve, you reached out, and Jennifer, you got me a card. So it's good to know that, when times are tough in Middletown, we're always there for each other. So just wanted to thank you guys. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Farrell. Mrs. Carter.
First, I'd like to apologize for being late. I work in Cincinnati, and 75 is I won't say it. I'm in a thankful mood. I want to thank Mr. Shakir for giving me some information. I appreciate that. And I want to thank Nathan and Ashley for stepping up, and you call them, they on it. And so we truly appreciate you guys. I want to thank our chief and the deputy chief for here protecting us, for watching over us. I really appreciate that. So as I said, I'm in a thankful mood. So, Mayor.
Thank you, Mrs. Carter. Mr. West.
Yep, thank you, Mayor. I'm in a thankful mood that the last meeting didn't go till 10 o'clock at night, but we're trending that way right now. I don't have much to say. I hope everybody had a great holiday weekend. I did want to shout out and thank Cleveland Cliffs. They donated this past weekend a bunch of tickets to a charity organization that I'm a part of called the Driven Project. And so there were a lot of pediatric cancer patients that got to ride along with us and then attend an FC game. And that was in large part due to Cleveland Cliffs for donating tickets to the game after the drive. Thank you. That's all I had.
Thank you, Mr. West. Mr. Horn.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess what I want to mention is the importance that's going to happen about 60 days from now, and that is everyone needs to register or make sure that you are registered to vote. That is one of our things that we have as citizens of this great country, and I think it's very important that we are aware that we need to do that. And you vote who you want to vote for, but that is your right, and you need to make sure that you're registered and that you, or to register. And also I just wanted to mention that we have a council meeting on election night. And I think the polls close at 7. So I don't know if we want to just think about it for now, but we might want to bump the meeting up so the citizens can get all their voting in. But we are having a council meeting on election night. Back to you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Horn. And I just wanted to make some of these announcements. Middletown's annual street paving program is continuing, and it's making good progress. And the pavement striping, the lining of the streets, is scheduled to begin this week. The Butler County Department of Development is seeking input on housing and community development related challenges as it develops its 5-year consolidated plan and does an analysis of impediments to fair housing choice. The in-person public meeting was tonight. September 3rd from 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. in the County Commissioner's first floor conference room at 315 High Street in Hamilton. The virtual public meeting is this Thursday, September 5th from 2 p.m. to 3:30 p.m. on Zoom. So any agencies or individuals interested, please find out more by writing Ms. Susan Ellerhorst, the Community Development Administrator, at susan.ellerhorst@bcohio.gov, or by calling Ms. Ellerhorst at 513-785-5773. Middletown Connect and the Health Department are partnering to offer expungement information and voter registration this Saturday, September 7th at the Elks Lodge located at 912 8th Avenue from 10 a.m. to noon. Sunday hours are returning to the Middletown Midpoint Library starting this Sunday, September 8th, with the public opening, the building being open from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. on Sundays. DMI's Dog Day Downtown is next Friday, September 13th, beginning at 5 p.m. in downtown Middletown at Governor Square. It is a day for the dogs and so much fun. So if you're a dog lover, you definitely want to get there. For more information, please visit DMI's Downtown Community Calendar at downtownmiddletown.org. Middletown is hosting its first Comic Expo on Saturday, September 14th from 11 a.m. to 8 p.m. at Miami University Middletown in Johnston Hall, located at 4200 North University Boulevard. You might have seen that in the paper. For tickets and more information, please visit www.middletowncomic-expo.com. Our last Middletown Farmers Market for the season will be this, Sunday, September 15th from 10 a.m. until 2 p.m. at the Middletown Bus Depot downtown. For more information, please contact Jerry Lewis at jeril@cityofmiddletown.org. And then just some save the dates. Please save the date for the clean sweep of the Great Miami River watershed on Saturday, September 21st. For more information, please visit www.greatmiamirivercleanup.org. Please save the date for a Grandparents Raising Grandchildren Resource Fair on Saturday, September 28th. For more information, please visit www.f as in Frank, B as in boy, C, middletown.org, or call 513-423-5721. Please also save the date for Middletown's second annual Hispanic Heritage Festival, taking place Saturday, September 28th as well. For more information, please visit LUM, M as in Mary, .middletown2023@gmail.com. You can please email there. The City of Middletown accepts applications for our boards and commissions throughout the year, so if there is something that you have an interest in and you wish to give back to your city in this way, please do submit your application. And lastly, and as always, there are many ways to get involved with your community and give back. Join a board or committee, run for office, apply for a job with the city, volunteer at the hospital, pick up trash in your neighborhood or park, plant a garden in your yard, smile at a neighbor, find joy and satisfaction for a job well done in whatever work you do, or just have a positive and giving attitude. Find something that you can do regularly and give back. We are all connected and we are all in this together. The care of our city is an adventure in which we all get to share. That is all for me tonight, and this concludes our council comments. The next item on the agenda is the city manager's report. Our acting city manager, Mr. Cahal, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. I think we'll start off with a brief little presentation from BCRTA. Their executive director is here, waiting in the wings. He'll provide you a brief little update on all things transit here in town and in the area, but also more importantly, I think to start the conversation as to whether or not you're willing to entertain maybe a change in some operations going forward with our relationship with BCRTA. So I'll turn it over to Matthew.
Good evening, Mayor, councilors. Appreciate you taking some time to listen to me this evening. I'm here this evening primarily to ask you to consider transferring the city's grantee status as a transit system to the Butler County Regional Transit Authority. So what you may not be aware is that there are two transit systems in Butler County, Ohio. There's the Butler County Regional Transit Authority, and there is the City of Middletown. Since about 2012, the City of Middletown has contracted with the Butler County Regional Transit Authority to manage the city's transit system on your behalf. It's been a really good relationship. We work very closely together. Excuse me, works out very well, but it creates double work for the city and for the RTA. As far as the Federal Transit Administration is concerned, from their level at USDOT, you as the city are responsible for oversight and for management of your grants and all things with the transit system, which means you need to provide direct oversight to the RTA providing that service. So as part of that, you're keeping a lot of your own books, you're doing your own things, your city staff is getting caught up in a lot of fun audits and doing things like that, whereas the BCRTA is also doing a lot of the same things. The reason we wanted to bring this up and ask you to consider this is really because the way this is structured and why the city is a transit system right now is because you receive your own bucket of federal money to help support transit operations. The reason there too is because the BCRTA is part of what they call the Cincinnati urbanized area, the large urbanized area. So we share a bucket of money with Cincinnati Metro, Tank, Claremont County, and Warren County. City of Middletown, you get your own bucket of money. That is all yours. It doesn't matter who the grantee for the City of Middletown is. That money has to be spent within the Middletown urbanized area and spent for the benefit of the city. So that never changes. So in the scenario we're talking about, what we would do is probably just really cut out a lot of the bureaucracy. We would streamline a lot of operations, free up a lot of your staff's time to do things that aren't transit related, and help take care of things and move projects and things along more quickly. I'm sure there are lots of questions. I'm happy to answer a lot of that, but at the end of the day, this is probably a decision that doesn't really cost anybody anything and makes things easier and faster for both parties. So I don't want to take up too much of your time. That was a very quick overview, but I am happy to answer questions, or Nathan, if you think I've left something out, please feel free to jump in.
Thank you so much. Do we have any questions or comments? Yes, Mr. Horn.
Just a few questions, which I appreciate the coordination that you have. We're working with the city. So I think we've had conversations about this. And the only part, and I think it's probably baked in the cake, but I always want to make sure it's said, because there's something that's going to change. That's actually next May, where we can change routes when necessary, specifically for the aquatic center. Because one of the things we said was, look, we have a line that goes to the atrium. I know this is just small stuff, but it's the little things that count, that we'd have to alter or add a route that goes from the atrium over to the aquatic center so our citizens can take advantage of that. So with you having full control, we still have the ability to alter routes, and is that accurate?
Yes, absolutely. As the RTA, our objective is to serve the communities that we're providing service to. If we're not engaging directly with your planners and your economic development people to ask what you want, what you need, and what's important to you, then we're not doing our job correctly. We want to be heavily engaged. I know we've been working very closely with Lisha on city staff, because we want to be more engaged in that. We want to be a part of that. I actually think that's going to improve. It's almost separate from what we're talking about, but yes, absolutely, we want the city to be engaged. We want to be working together to make those decisions and do those things. We don't at all want to be making universal decisions or anything like that.
Thank you, Mr. Horn. Anything else? No? Okay. Any other comments or questions from council at this time? No. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Mr. Cahill, is there anything else for city manager's report?
No, ma'am.
All right. Well, at this time, let's take about a 7-minute break, and we'll come back in 7 minutes. All right. Thank you. We are back in session, and the next item on the agenda is our consent agenda. Mrs. Skank, would you please present the consent agenda?
For your consideration this evening, we have the approval of the City Council minutes from June 25th, 2024, to receive and file the Board of Building and Housing Appeals minutes from March 19th, 2024, and the Civil Service Commission of July 22nd, 2024, to confirm the appointments of Isaac Steinbrunner, Owen Stamper, and Joshua Patton to the position of firefighter/paramedic in the Department of Public Safety, Division of Fire, to confirm the conditional appointment of John Harris to a position of patrol officer in the Department of Public Safety, Division of Police, to confirm the reinstatement of Garrett Downing to the position of patrol officer in the Department of Public Safety, Division of Police, and to receive and file oaths of office for Nicholas Brumbach and Claire Fetters.
Thank you very much. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
It has been properly moved and seconded to accept the consent agenda. We will proceed to vote. Ms. Skank, please call the roll.
Mayor Slanka?
Yes.
Mr. Farrell?
Yes.
Mrs. Carter?
Yes.
Mr. West?
Yes.
Mr. Horn?
Yes.
The yeses have it, and the consent agenda is approved. Our next item is the motion agenda. We have one item on the motion agenda this evening. Mrs. Skank, please present the motion agenda.
To approve an agreement with the Board of Education for Middletown City School District to provide school resource officers for the 2024-2025 school year.
Thank you. Mr. Cahal, the staff report, please.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. As alluded to in the Friday letter this last week, an agreement like this can be executed at an administrative level, but I thought it was important to bring it before all of you, just make sure there's clear guidance on how you wish to proceed. As you know, the school district gave us a cancellation notice probably about 50 days ago, 45, 50 days ago, indicating their desire to cancel one of our two SRO contracts in the hopes of negotiating something to replace both the one that was asked to be canceled and the one that's still full force in effect. As you'll recall, council, our current arrangement with the school district is that we provide them 6 SROs for the district. 3 of those, the original 3, what we'll call the original 3 of the original contract, was for 3 SROs that are paid basically about 75% time by the school district under there and present in the schools just during the school year, not during the summer holiday. In the recent past, with maybe some national incidents driving the narrative, along with some federal funding to support it, the schools, in cooperation with the city, requested to up that to 6 SROs. And so those additional 3 were funded actually at 100%, but they also provided services in cooperation with the schools throughout the traditional school year as well as the summer break period as well. After receiving the notification, the school district passed legislation and a version of the agreement that for whatever reason just wasn't shared with the city until later that day. And so we've been reviewing that with legal counsel and to see, you know, the provisions of the agreement, and also get your direction on anything that you may want changed. There's a couple things that stand out. But what is proposed and what had been verbally, in terms of broad business points, verbally agreed to in principle, was to drop the number of SROs down to 5 from 6, with the schools, with all 5 of those SROs being just paid for and available to the schools during the academic year, not during summer break. During summer break, those officers would come back to the Division of Police, whether that's in a patrol, investigative capacity, whatever, which actually also helps during the summer months to fill some of the vacation slots and overtime that we would have to dole out. So it helps us at the end of the day as well. There are some legacy provisions in this agreement that are probably what our current law director's office wouldn't recommend, things that I think we can live with, but wanted to make sure you were fine with it. What's very important is besides the number of SROs in this agreement, the other provision is that this is just being proposed by the school district as a one-year agreement. This would only last until the 1st of July of this next year, or 31st of July, I'm sorry, of next year. So, we'll be at it again. There is one thing that I think we can live with. There's still the legacy. There's an arbitration clause in this agreement that says if we have any disputes, we'll go to binding arbitration. However, also, this has a 6-day notification period of just cancellation by either party for basically about any reason. Whether that's a hill to die on is another story. The other thing that's a little different from how we've had here is that in the other SRO contract, we did have a provision that there was some vehicle maintenance costs embedded in to the funding. That's absent in this agreement. You may ask me, okay, what is that annually? Depends on how old and used the vehicle is, the cruiser is, but that can be anywhere from a couple $100s to $700 or $800 a year on average. In the grand scheme of things, that's something for you to weigh. But wanted to just before at administrative level, we kind of wrap this up. Wanted you all to weigh in.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cahal. Any comments or questions from council? Mr. Horn?
I have a few. So let me make sure I got this right. They gave you a contract at 4:15 p.m. and they were going to vote on it on 6 p.m. on the same day.
That's about right, yeah, give or take 20, 30 minutes, yeah.
Okay, so before I started my company, I actually was in the big boy world and did some contracts, $200,000 up to $3.5 million contracts. At no time would a CM, construction manager, or GC come to my office at 3:30 and hand me a contract and say, okay, you have to learn the business to sign this. We'd have time to review it because it would be more of trying to be a working relationship to me. And that's the way we always did it. We were told, okay, you had X amount of time to review it, and if there was any legal that we needed to run through it with our company, and then we would send it signed, and if there was any what we called red lines, which is addenda, any things we didn't want to agree to, and then the contract would be executed. We could start the project, start the scheduling, and everything else. To me, the school district handing the city management group, the law director group, and also Chief Nelson, and saying, agree to this, we're going to approve it in an hour and 45 minutes is not really a working relationship. And we're starting to see a lot of this, unfortunately, when it comes to the school system. And my comments are not, I appreciate all three teams here. I want to be very clear about this. I think they should have given you more time. And school starts same time every year. It's not like this was not a mystery like, oh, is school going to start in August? Yes, it is. And we need our SROs. And SROs in Middletown have been here forever. When I went to Sherman School, our SRO was Officer Harvey Poff. And he would come to our school. Now, it was a little different then. We need more security, obviously, with metal detectors and concerns, so it was a little different. But all I'm trying to say is this is a tradition we've had in Middletown. And to give us a one-year deal just means that they're going to use when I looked it up, the state of Ohio requires that you have a licensed peace officer to be an SRO. So I'm assuming that the school is going to use another agency in a year, and maybe that agency could not respond. And with all the challenges that our chief is dealing with, 5 officers, be it even with community relations, more officers out in the field, I don't know. I mean, I also, again, I want our schools to be safe, but they're taking things out like, we're driving these vehicles, to and from different schools. They only want to pay 75% of our officers for 3 of them, and I think it should be a good deal for both parties and not lean toward one, and you should just do this because we've been doing this forever and you should just do as you're told. That's my thought.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions?
Yeah, I guess I'll go next. So first off, I want to say that the public safety in this city, I think everybody sitting up here on council now, and I know staff, we all take it very seriously. Whether it be in our communities, our businesses, or especially in our schools. Where I have an issue with this is the school system will put out publicly on social media and so on and so forth, you know, the health and safety of the students is primary and this and that. And then we get put forward a contract like this. With that said, you know, at the end of the day, there aren't going to be any officers that would be quote unquote laid off. I mean, we could use them on the streets, and we would, as a council, we would support whatever the chief wants. But you know, I have a lot of issues with this, and I've been one of the most outspoken when it comes to the schools. And here's the thing, you know, the city of Middletown, even when we were going through the recession and before the recession, you know, we were told that the schools need new buildings. It's going to improve quality of education. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. As a city as a whole, we all have passed levies, whether it be for infrastructure of the schools themselves, building new schools, operating levies, things like that. You know, the citizens in this community want the schools to succeed, and we've always said yes to them. But recently it seems like the schools are starting to put out some false narratives, and furthermore, starting to nickel and dime things. Case in point was the last meeting, or 2 meetings ago, where we were discussing the porta potty issue for the children that are practicing and have no access to restroom facilities. And, you know, of course, the schools come back and say, well, we'll split it with the city. Are you kidding me? That's on school property. It's the health and safety of your students, which is utmost concern. And on top of that, what do portalets cost, right? And that's why I asked you, Nathan. Here's the thing. And I got a very, very nice email from the superintendent this past week inviting me to a very private meeting to have some discussions. And I said, no. You can come down here in a public setting and we can discuss these things, because it's time for not only Middletown, but really in this country, we have open discussions with public education as a whole. Public education has gotten blank checks at all levels, federal, state, local. People are concerned with their property values, so they want to pass operating levies, whatever the case may be. But then we hear all of the negative publicity come out about educational choice, specifically here in Ohio. Well, it wouldn't be around if there weren't a need. If there weren't a need for ed choice in Ohio, it wouldn't be a thing. And so what I'd like to say to the city schools is, for one, you know, they have to understand that city staff, you guys get the blame for the increase in property taxes. It's not your fault, and quite frankly, you're not seeing any additional money. But you know who is? The schools. Schools are seeing the vast majority of that money. So while they're preparing themselves for a massive raise, we continue to see the nickel and diming. And to me, it's unacceptable. And I will not have a private meeting with the superintendent's office, the Board of Education. No, it needs to be in a public setting, because these are real issues that we need to discuss. Because I know I can probably speak for everybody up here. Most of the public comes after us for their property tax increases. And we're like, well, first off, it's at the state level. Secondly, don't blame Nancy Nix. It's a triennial assessment. We go through all of it, and then we say at the end, when they're still mad, well, you know who's getting the money are the schools. So I think it's kind of ridiculous that they're scaling back the number of SROs, because we know they could come with us and say, okay, we only need 3 SROs. Really? How many normal patrol officers are going to have to show up?
because it's still the burden is still on the police department, whether you want to label this unit an SRO or this unit is on patrol, whatever the case may be. The burden is there. The problems are still there in the schools. And then to hear about they don't want to pay for maintenance on vehicles. When does the free pass end? And I just went through their latest financial statements. It's a very large number that's sitting there. And I'm just completely unhappy with it. And so I sent an email back to the superintendent saying, I will not have a private discussion. You are more than welcome to come to a council meeting and we can have a public, or we can even have a town hall. We can do something in the public light. No response, not a lick, nothing. So I think as a whole, like, no, I'm against it. I'm against it 100%. We will make sure that we take care of public safety in this city. But when it comes to the safety of those children, the burden's still on us. Whether they want to admit what they truly need to keep the schools safe, that's on them. But at the end of the day, if God forbid something were to happen in the schools on this next iteration of the contract, and we call MSNBC and say, hey, you know, they just scaled back their SRO contract. Didn't make sense to us at the time. I'm not sure what reason and logic they had, saying that they needed fewer SROs, they needed fewer resources. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to me, the last few things that I've seen from the city schools, and I'm not afraid to call it out. I don't own a business in this town. I'm not some historical legacy name in this town. I don't care. Like, my grandpa doesn't live here. He's dead. Even if he did live here, I don't care. You know, my parents did get married at the Manchester Inn. I'm not one of these Middletown guys. I'm looking at this from sound logic and reason, and everything that I'm seeing from the Middletown City School District and the superintendent's office and the Board of Education makes zero sense to me. Makes zero sense to me. When their Ezra dollars ran out, they ran to the media and said, we have to lay off all of these school administrators and this and that, and we have to, you know, these helpers. No, it's just because it wasn't paid for, not by you. The money was there. So, again, I've invited the superintendent down here. I'm willing to have a public discussion with all of them, but everything that I'm seeing from them is not a working relationship as her email described to me. For years, there's been this great working relationship. In my opinion, for years, it's been the citizens always saying yes to the schools, and we still have subpar standards. They backed out of Sunny Hill. I made that point clear, but just in case, I'm going to reiterate it again. Early childhood literacy rates in this city are absolutely disgusting, and we should be ashamed of them as a city as a whole. And I thought Sunny Hill would be a step in the right direction. The work that's done there is phenomenal, and anytime kids can get in that environment that's academically driven, or in an environment where they have resources to where they can learn, and the school district just says, no, we're going to build a new a bus depot. Priorities. When you look at it from an educational standpoint, a safety standpoint, I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing it at all.
Thank you, Mr. West. Are there any other comments or questions, remarks? I was wondering, did they discuss why they wanted to go down from 6 to 5?
So that was part of our back and forth, not to give you the inside baseball too much, but there were various scenarios out there. This originally started in the early summer at one of our monthly meetings where we were informed that the school district just budgeted, I believe it was around $200,000 less for SROs for this current school year, and how are we going to work that? So that was the genesis of things, for whatever it is. There were other numbers and scenarios thrown out. This was something that in principle, the 5 SROs for just 3/4 of the year was what, from an administration standpoint, we thought worked best by maximizing as much as possible the number of SROs, but within the fiscal constraints that we face as a city and the school district was communicating.
Reading the agreement, it looks like, and please correct me if I'm incorrect, it looks like there would be 5 SROs, and the school would be paying for them for like the 75% of the year.
Essentially, yeah.
So they'd be
About 9
paying
months.
us for the total amount of the time worked, basically.
Yes, that is correct.
Just the summers would be off.
Yes.
Okay, if this motion did not pass, what would happen next?
This is a discretionary action by the city manager, although really I'm seeking your input just to give me some guidelines or guardrails to drive within. If nothing happens, if no replacement agreement is signed here in the next about week, we would still have one contract in effect with the school district. That would be the contract for our 3 75%, am I right? Yeah. Our 3 officers that are paid at 70, the original SRO contract that was entered into back like in 2018 or 2019 or so. And those SROs, we would, as a city, we stand by our commitments and we'll keep our promises and contractual obligations.
Is the 3 deemed sufficient?
It is not what we would deem as the best solution here.
Okay.
But we work with the resources given.
A frustrating thing for me that I think my best friend's a state trooper and I have multiple friends that are cops, and I think something people forget is it's not just the cost of the police officer during the year, but it's recruiting. How much money do we spend on recruiting to get cadets that sometimes work out and sometimes they don't? And then we train them for 6 months and so on and so forth, and then they leave. The cost of lost opportunity is what I call that. The schools aren't responsible for that. So instead of nickel and diming us over maintenance costs, I kind of wonder if we're all in this together, and if we're getting, if the schools are essentially getting, in my opinion, more than 90% of the raise on property taxes between the city and the schools, I don't know why they're not in this together with us, because our success is their success and vice versa. We're tied together. So Steve said eloquently, I guess, a lot of things that I feel, but really I think common sense comes down to the fact of the more we can recruit, the better we can look, the more training we can have for our officers, only helps everyone. And I guess that's just a missing thing. I don't know what these contracts look like usually, right? I'm not going to act like an expert in that, but I do know when 2 parties are working together and one party is doing all the heavy lifting, that's usually not an equal equation. So, like Steve said, the safety comes back on us, and when I say us, I mean the guys in the trenches, which are,
So essentially what this is doing is forcing us into a corner, because if we say no to this, then they're only going to be on the hook to pay for 3 SROs at 75%. But they're still going to use way more public safety resources than those 3 SROs. So we're essentially forced to say yes to this to at least get some type of funding, whether, I mean, it's probably at a cut rate, not even Costco, probably Temu value to them, because if we say no, then they're in a better situation, and we're still taxing the public safety. That's the problem I have with it, is they hand you a contract at $415, and then they go on ahead and vote on it. It's unacceptable. In this city, people need to start realizing what's going on, because when you pay your property tax increase, 90% of that is going to the schools. It's not coming through this building at all. So, I mean, I'll say yes to it just because that's the only option we have. But it's unacceptable. It's not a working relationship, because I know they're watching. This is not a working relationship. It's unacceptable. And I will not have a private meeting to where I can try and get schmoozed. No, it can be a public meeting, because this is real life. This is real life. At the end of the day, the burden is on this building for the safety of this community as a whole, including the schools. And I take that very seriously. I take it very seriously. And the other thing I take very seriously is educating kids. That's another thing that I take very seriously. I've been on a school board here for a private school for years, and we count pennies. We try and do creative things to educate children. And the entire time we do it, we get a bunch of crap for ed choice. But you know what? The kids that are transferring in, my daughter was one of them. My daughter started at one of the schools here in Middletown, and at the end of the second grade, I was so frustrated. I pulled her out, sent her over, met with the principal, and said, "Show me what they're doing at the second grade level." She was lost, and that's a continued challenge that we face with ed choice. Is that when a parent makes a decision to pull a child and not start them there, there's a significant gap there. But I'm willing to work with Middletown City Schools, but it's time for them to understand that we're not just going to say yes and not talk about real things, because the next generation of kids coming up, I don't know what hope they have. You know, if they're struggling, if they're not in a positive environment, what resources do they have? You know, who's going to be their role models? And these are all things where I just see the schools nickel and dime, things that should be a quick yes, or like, hey, you know what, let's sit down with the city and have this discussion. Let's flesh this out. Let's give it some time. And it's not happening. So I'm just really, really disappointed and thankful that Ed Choice is around in Ohio and that the state has expanded it multiple times over the years.
Chief Nelson, if you don't mind, could I ask you, if you wouldn't mind coming down, just what the costs, so by the time you recruit somebody, take them through, I think it's 6 months of training, so we're paying their salary, we're paying their benefits. What does it cost to bring somebody in?
So right now, if you factor into the academy, which is what we're starting to do, which is you either send them to a free academy at OSP, or we pay for their academy. That at a minimum is $6,500 for one of the academies. Is up to $10,000 if you send them to Butler Tech. And then once you get to that, you start providing uniforms. Through the hiring process, you have the medical exam, the psychological exam, which is $2,500 each. And then various other things. Once you get them through the academy, then you have to equip them, which could be upwards to $5,000. A vest for us is $1,700 each. So you're looking at roughly around $10,000 at a minimum to start an officer off. And then if you want to factor in the training that goes along with the FTO on their base salary gets an additional $3 an hour when they are training a new officer. So it becomes costly when you start training new officers.
So is it fair to assume that it costs at least $50,000 to get an officer on the street?
At a minimum, yes.
Right. And the sad part is it's not even us, it's not even you guys, it's the taxpayers. So where would we be at? How many officers are we at right now? Because I know with Officer Downing coming back.
Yeah, on the street.
39 street officers? Okay. Where were we at a year ago, roughly?
We were around about 33.
33, so we're doing a lot better.
Yes.
So, if you don't mind me asking two questions. First of all, what do you think would happen if we did go down, if council decided to turn this proposition that the schools have given us with no choice down, if we said, all right, we want to go back to 3 officers for SRO, what do you think that would do? And then if the schools did want 6, is that something we could afford to do with men on the street?
So if we were to drop it down to 3, so I have to look at it 2 fronts, right? So the 3 remaining SROs that are left in the schools, their safety, first and foremost, because each school, I'm gonna say the high school is around about 1,400 students, and then so forth and so on, once you have the middle school there as well. And you had to divide those up. You would say 1 at the high school, 1 at the middle school, and then 1 SRO would have all the elementary schools. So you're looking at around about 3,000 students for 1 officer. It would increase the calls of service for our daytime officers. We would have to increase the patrol to the elementary schools that are normally done by the SROs. If we put them back on the street, I mean, that adds, it helps us on the street, but it takes away at the same time.
Sure.
So it's kind of give and take, and it's a tough place to be in. we could go either way. We could use them in either scenario. It benefits us both ways. But the SROs are beneficiary. It takes away our officers on day turns and beginning of our 311 shift not have to focus their efforts on the schools. The SROs take care of that for us. If they're taken out, then that's extra patrols, extra transports, extra calls for service that are going to come from the schools.
Do you feel like 5 is a comfortable number to operate with? What do you feel comfortable with?
It's manageable.
Okay.
We discussed it with the city manager. It's manageable, but again, you're looking at one at the high school, one at the middle school, and then 2. So you're dividing the 3,000 that you would have for the elementary schools in the 1,500, and it'll probably come out to about 1,500 students per officer.
What do other school districts, or I'm getting deep into the weeds here, but I know, for example, at King Schools, they have one at every single school they have. What do other school systems do?
As we've looked at it, there's some that are fully funded by the city and others that aren't. It just depends on the school district.
Okay. Is that fully funded by the city or fully funded by the schools usually?
By the city.
Okay.
There's one, quote me on this, but I think it's Oxford, where Oxford is fully funded by the city.
Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Nelson.
Thanks, Chief.
And I think to amplify, maybe an answer for your question, Mr. Farrell, the numbers here for 5 at 75, that was just, honestly, I won't say it's arbitrary, but it gets to a budget number that the school districts
Had earmarked, yeah.
get to. But I think tonight, bottom line this is wanted to get your feedback, and if you're so inclined, just to pass a motion authorizing the city manager to execute a contract as generally laid out in your packet, to allow myself and the law director just a little bit of remaining wiggle room to work things out with the schools.
Mr. Cahal, I was wondering,
Yes.
several of the council members have spoken to the maintenance costs. I wonder if that's something that we could put into the contract, that the schools would also cover that. What's the consensus around that?
We're not going to have time for that, though, are we? We got to get this done. Otherwise, we go down to 3. I'll motion to pass it as it is and worry about maintenance costs later.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
It has been properly moved and seconded, and is there any discussion, any further discussion?
I have a question.
Mhm.
Yes. So this number 5 and 6, is that your guys's being acting city manager and chief getting together saying, look, this is our minimum, that if we have a situation that you have 1,500 students for one officer, was that your number that you came up with, the 5 or 6?
I'll say that there's no science to this. I won't speak for Chief Nelson, let him speak for himself, but in our discussions internally, Mr. Horn, we are used to operating at 6 bodies
Okay.
in the school across all the buildings.
This is where I'm going, just give me
Yeah.
a little rope on this.
5 is, as Chief Nelson said, is manageable.
So to negotiate with the school, is the school saying we have to have 5? Did the school say that at any point in time? We have to have 5 or 6?
There were times in the beginning of, we'd love to have 6, but we didn't budget for the existing contracts.
Okay, so again, to Mr. West's point, they're nickel and diming us. Because my feeling is, again, if we're trying to work together as Mr. Yoder once told us, that the school system and the city is like Texas and Oklahoma. I love that. 2 different states, 2 different governments, but that we share a border. They should be friendly with each other. We have same colors, white and purple, all that, same building. So to me, if they're trying to truly work with us, because we do need more officers out in the street, and then we'll get more officers because it's a 1-year deal, which just also tells me that they're negotiating with someone else, maybe a Butler County person, another agency. So, I guess to me, if I was going back for negotiation purposes, some of those legacy things maybe just kind of say, look, we want to work with you. We want you to have 6 officers. We want, in case of an incident, we want safety. We want we want a Middletown PD officer to be there for that group, because like the chief said, if there is something, you only have 1 officer, then he has to send more reinforcements when that happens, because you have the numbers are overwhelming. But to me, again, maintenance on a vehicle, and whatever else they're trying to slide in there, I don't know. I mean, yes, they've got us boxed in, Steve, and they knew it when they did this. But if we vote no, does that give you the opportunity to, we're in the same building, or you're in the same building, is there a negotiation where you can go back and say, look, if you do this, then we can get this happening sooner than later?
I think if your motion is worded to grant the city manager the ability to execute a contract as generally presented, we have some ability to address a few loose ends.
All right, thank you. Anything else before we move to vote?
Are you saying for maintenance costs, or are you saying for bringing that number up to 6, just so I'm aware? Sure. Sure.
Year deal. Who really wants to have a year deal? But to Steve's point, they've got us boxed in because if not, then we're the assholes that said, no, we need 3 officers, and then, send perhaps police department if we have an incident out at the high school or the middle school, which is fortunately they're in the same location, or a elementary school. So they got us.
Any other comments before we vote? Okay, so there is a motion on the floor.
I'll amend my motion to allow the city manager to engage in finalization of small details in the contract.
Does that need to be amended, or is that implied?
You're fine with that. I would actually probably just say something along the lines of motion to approve the acting city manager to engage in a SRO agreement with Middletown City Schools on terms as good, if not better, than what's currently proposed.
Okay, since there was a motion on the floor already, can we just go ahead and amend that to what Mr. Yoder has just said? Okay, so that is the motion on the floor. It has been moved and seconded, and we can now vote. Mrs. Skank, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Farrell,
Yes.
Mrs. Carter,
Yes.
Mr. West,
Yes.
Mr. Horn,
You have enough, so no.
Mayor Slamka.
Yes. The yeses have it, and the motion passes. The next item on the agenda is legislation. So, Mr. Yoder.
Finally, the exciting part of the agenda, isn't it? All right, so you've got 8 items on the agenda tonight for the legislation. The first one being ordinance number O-2024-43, an ordinance establishing a procedure for and authorizing a contract with Animal Friends Humane Society for services related to stray and seized animals within the city of Middletown. This is a second reading.
Thank you very much. Mr. Cahall, do you have anything that you'd like to add at this time?
I just point out to council, this is actually a second reading of some legislation that was first in front of you, I think actually back in July of this year. Since then, there's been some refinement to the contract language. The legal law department has signed off on it. City staff has signed off on it, and there's just some refinement of some of the details here with this vendor.
Thank you very much. Is there a motion to approve the ordinance?
Motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we will proceed to vote. Mrs. Skank, please call the roll.
Mrs. Carter,
Yes.
Mr. West,
Yes.
Mr. Horn,
Yes.
Mayor Slamka,
Yes.
Mr. Farrell.
Yes.
The yeses have it, and the legislation passes. Mr. Yoder, the next legislation item, please.
Second item is ordinance number O-2024-65, an ordinance authorizing the city manager to enter into a job creation incentive grant agreement with EI Ceramics LLC and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Mr. Cahall, the staff report, please.
Yes, council, as we talked about the last meeting, this is just a standard JSIG agreement with EI Ceramics for their bringing of about 70 to 80 new jobs day one to the old Certa site here in the city. This is the last piece of that transactions puzzle before we proceed to closing here in about 2.5 weeks.
Thank you very much. Is there a motion to approve the ordinance?
Motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
It has been properly moved and seconded. Is there any discussion?
I hope that council and the city understands this is probably one of the best things we'll ever do on the city council. It'll be one of the last best things I ever do, but to take this building from what it was to where everybody drove by and talked how great it was 30 years ago, and we make fun of it now, to where it's going, the investment that it's getting, how the Butler County Land Bank has worked with the state, that's worked with the city, and not only that, to repurpose the building, but to bring a large employer in here who has the chance to draw other employers around them. It's a phenomenal deal, and I just hope everybody understands how deep of a thing this is. So that's all I have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Farrell. Any other comments or questions? All right. Hearing none, we will proceed to vote. Mrs. Skank, please call the roll.
Mr. West?
Yes.
Mr. Horn?
Yes.
Mayor Slanka?
Yes.
Mrs. Carter?
Yes.
Mr. Farrell?
Yes.
The yeses have it. The legislation passes. Mr. Yoder, the next item, please.
Third item is ordinance number O-2024-66, an ordinance amending section 1066.07 pertaining to rates and charges of the codified ordinances. A second reading.
Thank you very much. Mr. Cahill, do you have anything to add?
Just a reminder that you folks approved a new contract with Rumpke, and then this is the corresponding legislation to pay for said contract. These rate increases would take effect at the beginning of 2025.
Thank you very much. Do we have a motion to approve the ordinance?
Motion?
Is there a second?
Second.
It has been properly moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Mr. Horn?
Just remember, citizens, it's $2.50 a month. Please stop sending me the emails. I didn't do this.
Thank you, Mr. Horn. Are there any other comments or questions?
Everybody email Paul, not me.
Thank you, Mr. West. Any other questions or comments at this time? Hearing none, we will proceed to vote. Mrs. Skank, please call the roll.
Mr. Horn?
Yes.
Mayor Slanka?
Yes.
Mr. Farrell?
Yes.
Mrs. Carter?
Yes.
Mr. West?
Yes.
The yeses have it, and the legislation passes. Mr. Yoder, the next item, please.
Fourth item is ordinance number O-2024-67, an ordinance establishing a procedure for and authorizing an amendment of the contract with Community Building Institute for operation of the community center. A second reading.
Thank you. Mr. Cahill, do you have anything to add?
Just to point out to council that based on your discussions and staff's interpretation of things, what was originally presented to you was a recommendation to just provide a one-year extension, the first of 3 options by the parties. There was a discussion of council, as you remember, that you wanted to lengthen that. What's in front of you would be executing in full all 3 years of those options, all 3 years in one fell swoop. That does not mean that if you have another number in mind, assuming CBI agrees to it, that you couldn't amend things here from the floor. But what is provided to you for consideration tonight is a maximization of the existing contract.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cahill. Is there a motion to approve the ordinance?
Motion?
Is there a second? Second. It has been properly moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Yes, Mr.
I
Horn.
just want to verify. So that was, so you talked with the group, so we now have a 36-month agreement with them?
That's what's in front of you tonight. That was per the original request from CBI. Was
I think you were going to talk about the rates with them and everything else, negotiate, because we have a good working relationship, and I think that should be rewarded at times versus just.
And we have a record too that the city actually mid-contract with CBI, probably about 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago, adjusted their contract rate when they demonstrated that, hey, here's some costs that we've run into, or here's another program that we can provide here for a little extra dollars.
Okay.
Also, the last meeting, I think the number was 5 years. That was the
Right.
discussion.
60 months?
Yeah, so did we
Yeah.
want to amend this to the 5-year mark again?
That's your prerogative.
I'm for it.
Are we?
Yeah, I'm for, I mean, they're gonna have some headaches with construction and stuff, so
I agree.
thought it would be, yeah.
Okay, so let's go ahead and amend. We need to put a motion to amend, correct?
Correct.
All right, may I have a motion to amend the ordinance to change from 3 years to 5 years?
Motion?
And is there a second?
Second.
It has been properly moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? In that case, we will proceed to vote on the amendment to the ordinance. Mrs. Skank, please call the roll.
Mr. Farrell?
Yes.
Mrs. Carter?
Yes.
Mr. West?
Yes.
Mr. Horn?
Yes.
Mayor Slanka?
Yes. Then that passes. Can that also just go ahead and include
Yep.
the legislation?
Yep.
All right, so that has passed. Wonderful. The next legislation item, please.
Fifth item is resolution number R 2024-24, a resolution to make adjustments to appropriations for current expenses and other expenditures of the city of Middletown, counties of Butler and Warren, state of Ohio for the period ending December 31st, 2024, and declaring an emergency. Pertains to the ARPA and general fund.
Thank you very much. Mr. Cahal, the staff report, please.
As has been telegraphed to council for at least 4 months, there was anticipation that at some time here, starting in the third quarter or sometime in the third quarter of this year, that we would be presenting to you what we call a revenue replacement legislation that would spend down the remainder, the unutilized and/or unearmarked reserves in our ARPA fund. And so this legislation would do exactly that. Now, God love our auditor of state. It's not as easy or per their directive, and there have been some audits out there that have said, shame on you. This isn't as easy as just moving all the money in one fell swoop from the ARPA fund to the general fund or some other fund. We have to demonstrate that there's a spend down of applicable costs out of the ARPA fund before the end of the year. So how this manifests itself is that the dollars that you see are being requested to be appropriated. Those are being appropriated to then cover costs that were originally for 2024 budgeted to be covered by the general fund. So in essence, we are going to take some general fund expenses related to public safety costs and supplant the general fund's budget by moving those expenses to a different fund, it being the ARPA fund. So what we will have is at the end of the day, we come to the same location. We just took a different route than what Google Maps told us to take, was that we are at the end of the day going to have a general fund reserve at the same level as if we had just merely transferred the dollars and paid all general fund expenses out of the general fund. So that in a nutshell is what this legislation does. It also additionally, which was the druthers of council, for our second round of home improvement grants, it appropriates those dollars sufficiently out of the general fund and not ARPA because we have some timing issues, but doing the revenue replacement, one hand washes the other, so to speak. And the request tonight is to pass this by emergency just so that we can ensure that we have enough time between now and the end of the calendar year to charge off and expense adjust all of these figures, and we don't have a need sometime in January for an emergency meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Cahal. Is there a motion to approve the ordinance?
Motion?
Is there a second? It has been properly moved and seconded. Is there any discussion?
I'm confused about the American Rescue Plan Act and the money that was sent to us. So you're saying that you're going to take that money and move it into the general fund?
No, ma'am.
No.
No. So what we're doing here is this final transaction is that, as you know, in the general fund, there are certain public safety costs, wages of fire and police personnel, for instance, that we, under all normal circumstances, pay out of the general fund. They're general fund departments, they're paid out of the general fund. We have this residual corpus of our 19 plus or minus $1 million of ARPA that has just not been spent and or earmarked or encumbered for anything that we can specifically, a specific project or a specific other program, that we can say confidently that we will not run afoul of having to return to the federal treasury any of these ARPA dollars if they're not spent in time. So this is kind of an insurance policy move, so to speak. So what we're going to do is we're appropriating these funds that are in the ARPA fund to pay for those expenses that the general fund would normally pay. So think about it this way. We normally, I'll normally pay my mortgage at the beginning of every month, but I have this other fund, my neighbor across the street, that says, Nathan, I'll pick up your mortgage for the next couple of months. You don't have to pay that as part of your household expenses. My checkbook, the general fund's reserve, is going to go up because I'm not paying my mortgage for the next couple of months. This is the same effect and impact on the general fund. We are going to shift certain expenses in public safety, which are allowed under the ARPA rules, from being paid exclusively from the general fund to being paid out of this residual amount out of ARPA.
So why not just use the ARPA funds to continue to make repairs on people's homes?
Mr. Yoder, would you like to?
The issue we have with that in principle, totally understand the sentiment. The issue is we're arriving at, under this legislation, we're going to arrive at the same place. Those programs will be funded. The first and second rounds, the second round of all the home improvement grants will be funded. The issue we have is under federal administrative rules is that all ARPA dollars have to be fully encumbered before the end of this year.
Right.
Which we believe we can probably get there with most of these applicants for these grant programs. But then the other issue is this. They also have to be spent by a certain amount of time, which, hey, that's in 2 years or a year and a half or whenever. That's great too. We're not too worried about that. But here's the issue. What we are running into, especially these home improvement grants, is we have homeowners that are giving estimates and they say, hey, my project's going to be, I don't know, I'll make up a number, $8,000. And we put in 4,000, let's say. Then they decide, you know what? I cut back the square footage off this, or I went with a cheaper material for my fence, and it only costs $6,000, so maybe we only put 3. Well, we've gone past the timeline to redirect those dollars, because if it happens past the end of the year, which some of these grants are going to bleed into 25, we have to return those dollars to the federal government. We can't keep them. This is a way to keep those dollars local.
Some people have to match what we give, right? Is that how that works?
Yeah, the grant program is on a percentage split up to a cap that the city will provide. So I believe for the home improvement grants, don't quote me on this one, but it was a 50-50 split, let's say up to, what was it, $4,000 or $5,000 of, or $4,500 or something, $4,500 of ARPA dollars or city dollars to match. So yes, if someone came in and said, I'm going to do this project, I'm gutting my house, and it's going to be $75,000, that's great. Our maximum, though, wouldn't be half of $75,000. It would be up to that cap.
So think of it this way, Jennifer, in the federal space, it's really weird. There's different, what we call like colors of money. There's different ways to obligate it. So you can obligate it to earmark it to hold it, but you don't have to expend it for X amount. But then money will have like an expiration date. So like the easiest way I kind of tell people in my career is think of it this way. Let's say you have a $100 Amazon gift card. The gift card is completely fine. It's good. But the condition is you have to fill your Amazon cart between now and December 31st, up to $100 worth, right? You don't have to purchase it all right then, but you have to make those purchases, let's just say by summertime next year. Well, let's say come January, February, you're like, oh, I don't want those two things anymore. I want to trade it out for something else, or I just want to put it back. All that money, any changes that you make to your cart, Amazon will keep after 1 January. It's super weird, but the way when you revenue replace, it ensures that every single dollar stays locally, and we're not risking any potential money that we'd have to give back to the Federal Reserve if there were changes to what the obligations were by December 31st.
You're just basically buying a $100 Visa gift card on your $100 Amazon card.
Yeah.
So you can ensure that you get that cash later.
Yeah.
This changes nothing other than just ensures that you're getting the totality of the ARPA monies that were allocated to the city.
Mm-hmm.
In the future, we will be able to choose the projects with this about $1.2 million that we'll have in the general fund as an increase, sort of. We can choose at our leisure what projects we want to use those monies on. That's my understanding.
Yeah, I mean, you keep in mind that once this transaction is completed and effectuated, you're left with a supplanted higher level in your general fund at the end of the year than we would normally have budgeted for. And those are general fund dollars. You can use those for essentially any general governmental legal purpose without all of the administrative rules and strings attached that ARPA has.
Right, but we can keep it, but that's the thing, we can also keep that in mind. That's 1.2 million,
Okay.
right? So we can
Yeah.
pick and choose what kind of projects we want to
So
work
we
on.
can come back later and
Of
give
course.
people money to
Yes.
repair their homes?
Yes. If
Okay.
that's what council
Okay,
wants to do.
Okay,
Yes.
okay,
The federal government just makes us legally launder money.
Right.
Essentially, that's what it is.
I didn't want to put it that way
say that.
tonight with
Allegedly.
That's
the
essentially
media
what it
here,
is.
and Lauren will give me the business in the morning. But
didn't
yes,
wanna
that's
say
essentially
it,
what
but
we're
it was-
doing. We're legally laundering this.
Yeah.
illegal. I didn't want to even put that in my mouth, but I'm thinking
Legal.
in my head that,
Mr. Yoder, your take,
sound right.
just to be on record?
Yeah, legal laundering, that's the key
Yeah.
part, is the legal.
You don't have to buy a car wash in this scenario.
Not a full wash, we're just hitting it with some Febreze.
okay, okay.
Excellent. Okay, that
All right.
said, are there any other comments or questions regarding this legislation? Hearing none, we will proceed to vote. Mrs. Kank, please call the roll.
Yes.
Mr. West?
Yes.
Mr. Horn?
Yes.
Mayor Slanka?
Yes.
Mr. Farrell?
Yes.
The yeses have it, and the legislation passes. Mr. Yoder, the next item, please.
Sixth item is resolution number R 2024-25, a resolution accepting the amounts and rates as determined by the Budget Commission and authorizing the necessary tax levies and certifying them to the county auditor and declaring an emergency. No actions requested until the September 17th meeting.
Thank you. Mr. Cahal, the staff report, please.
Yes, Butler County still practices the Byzantine method of using a annual tax budget through the County Budget Commission process, and so we participate in that every year. And the Budget Commission has come back with its blessing of all of the various property tax millages and effective rates and all that. And so this is an annual, I would almost call it ministerial, but it's a little bit more important than that. It's an administrative function to say that we concur with the Budget Commission's recommendation and findings, which they didn't take anything away, but they didn't give anything more. So, but it's status quo.
Thank you. As this is a second reading emergency, there is no action required. However, is there any discussion at this time? Hearing none, we will proceed. Mr. Yoder, the next item, please.
Seventh item is resolution number R 2023-26, a resolution authorizing the city manager to submit an application to the Ohio Public Works Commission for project year 39, requesting funding for the resurfacing and reconstruction of various streets throughout the city and restoration of curbs, gutters, driveway aprons, and sidewalks deemed defective by the city, also including handicap ramp upgrades, catch basin and drainage repairs as necessary, to enter into agreements for such funding and declaring an emergency. Again, no actions requested until the September 17th council meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Yoder. Mr. Cahal, the staff report, please.
Yes, this is an annual authorizing piece of legislation that allows staff to apply to the Ohio Public Works Commission for the annual round of funding for various public works projects. As has been done in years past and in previous funding cycles, it's our intention to, with your blessing, to apply for supplemental funds to help stretch our paving and road reconstruction program annually even farther. Those types of projects in our community, with the amount of average daily traffic on many of our thoroughfares and arterials and collectors, we score incredibly well. We estimate that, knock on wood, hopefully we'll get another, usually somewhere around $1 million a year from OPWC as part of these grants. So this would simply allow us to take a typical paving year and stretch it out even longer.
Thank you so much, Mr. Cahal. As this is a second reading emergency, there is no action required at this time. However, is there any discussion?
Question for you, Nathan. Is
Yes, sir.
there any way to, I don't know if this makes sense, but is there any authority that evaluates your roads versus other roads throughout the state or something? Because, go ahead.
Yes, and we typically will do that in-house. Sometimes, I've been part of communities that would maybe outsource that, but there is a standard, what I call it, I won't say a measuring stick, but there are some standard assessment tools out there to look at your conditions of pavement that look at both, surface course issues, whether you're getting any alligatoring, you're getting major potholes, any signs of base failure, those types of things. And that is something that drives our Public Works' department's decisions of prioritization of certain streets. Now, in fairness, is as much a little bit of art as it is as much science, though, too, because you're juggling things from not only what's the pavement look like, but you're also assessing what's the average amount of traffic daily that's on the street X, Y, or Z, and also how many budget dollars do I have, because sometimes the worst things you can do is you start repaving a street and you get 3 houses to the end of the cul-de-sac and you stop because you don't have any more money. So we also have to factor in how much, cubic yards of pavement and linear feet of sidewalk and everything else we're dealing with there. So there will be some fudging of the prioritization for those types of purposes, but we try to be as scientific in our assessment as possible.
So you were going way farther than I was trying to go, but I appreciate your response. So when people, whether they talk about the road's good or bad, I would like to give them something like stating like, here's actually where we're at. Like, this isn't just our opinion, but like.
Yeah, I can get with Scott's office.
I mean, I hate to be like, hey, can we spend $5,000?
If we have we should already in-house have now whether the ratings on particular streets are this year or 2 or 3 years old, but yeah, we should have a rating of, I'll say, good condition, fair condition. Hey, it's going to be pretty close next on the list for.
Well, but even further than that, I see what you're saying, and I agree with what you're saying, but I think our roads are pretty darn good, especially after the tax levy. They're
getting there.
Sorry, before there.
Yeah.
But I mean, in driving in neighboring communities, I think we beat a lot of them now, and I still hear a lot of negativity around them, and I think that's just a little bit of old school mentality. I just don't know if there's a way to actually formulate scientifically, like, this is where we're at.
And I think a community like ours, because we have such large thoroughfare, or we have such large arterials through town, whether you're looking at Roosevelt, you're looking at University, Verity, or whatnot, that also happen to be state routes, and so we piggyback on ODOT money. But if you get off and that's what let's say non-Middletown residents and business and employees here in town, they're people passing through town, they're on those main drags versus they don't go 3 blocks into a neighborhood and see, for instance, drive around the Sunset Park area or whatnot, and some of those side streets, they're pristine now. Didn't used to be, but they are now. Mm-hmm. The same is for our main drags, is that's probably because we're so robust in our roadway network for those main arterials through town. That's a place that I would like to see us catch up a little bit more. But I think for our local streets, I think we're safely on our trajectory to be on a 20-year cycle on all of our local streets.
Scott and I were talking about that today, and he said in the last few years, it's over 200 streets that have been repaved, which I found I think our roads are in way better shape than a lot of communities, especially the west side of Cincinnati. You can blow a tire out on any road there, side street, main drag. But when I heard over 200, I thought that number was amazing.
It has to be 50% of the streets within the last
we've cranked out some lane miles, but I think to your point though too, some of these main drags, the south end of Route 4 through town is getting a little rough. There's parts of Roosevelt that are needing some love, and ODOT's stepping up and going to go from basically University to Jackson Lane next year. We're ahead of them doing sidewalk and curb work, but yeah, those are the things and what we try to also do is with, like, say, OPWC applications or others, we try to piggyback and make kind of combo projects to where, hey, ODOT, you're already coming in and doing this many lane miles, and we're going to be right with you. Can we jointly bid and, do those things?
Is there any other further discussion or question? Hearing none, we will continue. Mr. Yoder, the last legislation item, please.
Thank you. Last one is resolution number R 2023-27, a resolution authorizing the city manager to apply for a matching grant and enter into a grant agreement with the Ohio Department of Transportation, Office of Aviation for Phase 2 of the Taxi Lane B1 realignment project at Middletown Regional Airport for fiscal year 2025. First reading.
Thank you, Mr. Yoder. Mr. Cahill, the staff report, please.
So as you may recall, at a previous meeting, you awarded a contract for the taxiway or taxi lane B1 realignment at the airport, kind of towards the north and east end of the facility. We also accepted and approved an FAA grant. This is the ODOT tag-along grant for 5% of the project's cost. So by voting yes, we are entitled to almost another $50,000 to offset our costs.
Thank you very much. And again, as this is a first reading, there's no action required on this legislation item tonight. However, is there any discussion at this time? All right, hearing none, we will proceed. This concludes the legislation for the evening. The next item on the agenda is unfinished business. Do any council members have anything they would like to bring up under unfinished business?
I do.
Mr. Horn?
Couple items. Unfinished business. What happened to the Kroger opioid grant money, whatever?
I know that we authorized a settlement, and we have executed all of those settlement agreements. We did, and that's part of our 2025 budget proposal, we have probably over the last 30 days received amongst the 6 or so settlements we're a party to right now, we've received probably north of a couple $100,000 in settlement payments here in the last 30 to 45 days, I guess. And we're examining all of those settlements right now to pinpoint exactly the parameters for using those funds, because some of them are a little different than the others. But they are all going into one fund to where we can see where those are. And we should have a plan of action here when we present the budget as to what to use those funds for.
Okay. Number 2, Mr. Yoder, I talked to you about it, but are we still working on our document with Cliffs to
We are.
release the
Yes.
the senior center from its shackles?
Yes, we are.
Good. And then the last one, and it's more of it's unfinished business, but it's a suggestion. So the football youth group is using around Barnett's Field, and there was a suggestion of a portalette being there for the kids to be able to use the restroom. I do see how the school system, or any time, when you put a portalette out there, if it's not just for a weekend and you have it there and you have it removed where others can use it and destroy it and do whatever. But here's maybe a suggestion for next year as we're trying to build this relationship. At Barnett Stadium, they have 3 permanently plumbed restrooms. They have the gym where the football players work out. They have Barnett Stadium, they have restrooms there, and they have Rosa Parks School. I am sure that if there has to be a document being signed for a waiver of liability, or if they want to say, okay, we need to have an officer there to unlock that door and then watch the kids, and that's part of his or her turn for safety purposes. But I think we need to look at the fact that we have property there that the school maintains, that the citizens paid for, and those children go to that school system. So this year, I'm sure football is almost over with, but maybe that is a suggestion for next year that permanent bathrooms that are available. And again, I understand if they say, well, we need a document signed, so if someone slips and bumps their head, we don't want to be sued. Or an adult or an officer is responsible for unlocking it. When practice is over, they lock it back up. But there are 3 permanent bathrooms in that area that those children could use, and maybe that's a thought for next season.
Thank you, Mr. Horn. Is there any other unfinished business to be brought up from council?
Yes.
Ms. Carter?
I'm wanting to know about 18th Avenue and the paving of 18th Avenue.
So our contractor is going to start on that water main. My understanding should be they may be mobilizing this week. They told us right after Labor Day. But once they get that pipe in, everything charged back up and tested, then paving will start. I can get with Scott Taddish's office to give you more of a better estimate, but I would imagine the size of that project, I would hope they'd be done by, middle of October.
Well, they did say we're starting to repave 18th Avenue this summer, and we are in September. And now
Let
they got
me
this-
check on that one, because I gotta see if there was part of it that was part of the paving program, and the other part we were waiting because of the water line replacement.
We have a big piece of metal
Yes,
right
that is correct.
in front of the church.
Yes.
Okay,
We're gonna
so
put a longer piece of metal in a trench where it's at, get a water
Right.
main going.
okay.
But I'll get back with you.
And also, I wanted to make a comment about the porta potties or the we have 2 porta potties down at Douglas Park, and they have not been destroyed. As a matter of fact, they're clean, and you can take your children in there and use it, and they got hand sanitizers. So all we were asking is something placed over on the side where the children are, and they're not. There is a park. This is a park, and you can set it right there at that alleyway, a porta potty, and then you don't even have to disturb Rosa Parks. We're talking about children under 12 find it hard to hold their urine, to run across to Rosa Park, to run across to Barnes Stadium, and they're only asking for it to be there 3 months. So I'm just perturbed that they even said no.
I can tell you personally, I reached out to Todd Moore, and he was working with the superintendent's office. I guess their main thing was homeless issues and no agreement fee with the user agreement with the program, which I don't know why they would be allowed to just use that without a user agreement, but that's separate. But from what I understood a couple weeks ago, they said, okay, we're going to wrap this up, do a user agreement, get this going. Now, from what I'm hearing, that's not actually been done. So, Nathan, if you could, to everyone's point up here, if it'd be possible, if you could just check in on that, because I was kind of under the assumption that I don't know why it's so complicated to get a user agreement. I don't know.
I plan on talking to the superintendent tomorrow.
So I'm sure you guys will have a lot to discuss.
We have a lot. So, it may be just a portalet just shows up there.
I mean, we'll pay for it. Just if they want to sign the user agreement, I mean, if I'm one person, right? But if everybody's okay with, it's like $2,000, like we'll just pay the 2.
Because it's logical.
Out the ARPA funds.
That's not bad.
I have 2 things, if you don't mind, Mayor. So as far as the home improvement repair program, I know everybody hates hearing about the updates on that, and I'm not necessarily asking for an update, but do we have sort of a timeline on when we might know what the funds asked for in general will be after you've ruled out the people that aren't necessarily eligible? So that way, because from my seat, I would like to, if it's possible and you guys can figure it out financially, like everybody that applied for that week, is it possible to be able to fund those? That's what I'm looking to figure out.
Yeah, I think right now what we're finalizing is final estimates by some of our homeowners. Agreements are going out the door and being executed by the grant recipients. We are just waiting to make sure costs, that's one of the things, is costs where they're at. So what we did here tonight with that supplemental appropriation, that allows us to now more nimbly monitor. So let's say, Mr. Farrell, you got a grant and you thought your project was going to be $10,000, ended up being $7,000. We may take some of that savings, hold it in abeyance, and then be able to fund the next person in line if they still are desirous of moving forward. Because, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ashley, but we we probably only felt comfortable going out the door with about 75 or so grants right now, and then see how those numbers hold. Because we also run the risk of applicants, every intention in the world, if they were going to do something to their house and they decided, I sold my house, or I'm not going to do it, or circumstances here at my household, I'm not going to get it finished in time. And they may give those grant dollars back. So we have to just play that by ear, but we'll have flexibility.
How many applications were there again? If you don't mind me asking.
162 or well north of 150.
So 75 was the number that we originally kind of factored in. So we're sticking with that number. Is kind of
for right now. We have identified eligible projects and applicants that just fell, a little short of that line in the sand. That if there are some savings or some projects that ultimately aren't executed or fully funded, that they would be next in line.
Well, I can tell you from my perspective, I would like to fund more than 75 projects in total.
Yeah.
So I don't know how the rest of council feels, but.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. There's not a perfect way to open up the grant program, but yeah, I would say that, we didn't necessarily have a cutoff, like an advertised cutoff date, like, this is sort of, so yeah, we kind of opened Pandora's box with it. So I would like to see so you're saying 100, let's say it's 162 were eligible, like they met all the requirements?
No. That's a gross number.
Okay.
There, in that 160 some, there are obvious applications that are not approvable.
Okay.
That they don't meet the requirements of the program or, the like.
Any idea what percentage of those might not be eligible of the 162 applied?
I have to get back to you on that one. I don't want to tell you inaccurate.
I think that's what I'd like to know, because I mean, let's say we're rolling out 25%. Is that a fair, safe number? Can we find if we have the money? I realize I sound like Mr. Spend the Money right now, but we did not do our best, and I'm not blaming any one person, but we did not do our best in getting these instructions out. And if we can afford to do it, if it helps the citizens that need it, I don't understand why we're, I realize we can't do it all overnight, but and I do think it makes sense to wait and see who doesn't use everything.
Right.
But,
I mean, keep in mind that you revenue replaced $1.2 million tonight. That frees up. Now there is that supplemental for making sure we fully fund both rounds of home improvement grant project. But I think we safely have, to Ms. Carter's point, Mayor Slamka's point of keeping track to see if there's other things that we would have done with ARPA if we had had enough time and been able to vet things out. This is definitely an eligible program. It's a poster child for it. And, if there's another need for another $300,000-$400,000, there it is, and can be supplementally appropriated.
So the people that, let's say, applied on Thursday and Friday, so are we still going to look at their project, or are we just kind of like not even dealing with those people right now?
Oh, it's been cut off.
I understand that. I'm saying the original week that was applied for, essentially the application, the guaranteed money dried up by Tuesday, let's say. So are we still communicating with those people that applied Wednesday through Friday? Or
we have not yet, until we knew where everything was shaken out monetarily, and make sure also, because the other thing we don't know is the attrition rate right now, because someone could have applied for dollars and maybe thinking that they had, $5,000 to match, and then circumstances, it didn't pan out, they're not going to do the project. They're like, hey, I know I applied for it, I'm not going to do it. So we don't know how many of those eligible projects are going to fall off and free up more. Our initial project review internally was kind of a tiered system. Number one, create 2 piles. We think definitely or somewhat eligible, definitely not eligible, totally ineligible, no. And then have those piles in the order that they were, they are in order of applying. yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, in terms of are they eligible, and also what kind of more information we have and the like. So we do have some that are in a pending file that would be funded if not for, funds being available. I don't know what that number is.
So that's the people that technically have not really been looked at. Is that what you're saying?
They've been given a cursory review, but
So-
since they were number 95 in the queue, it hasn't been run to ground.
So here's what I'd like to see. I'm going to annoy everybody here, but I would like to see what the total number would be if we approved what we felt like we can approve, and then work backwards.
Based on an eligibility standpoint?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's not stating that we're funding everybody, but if it can be shared.
No, I think that's good.
Good information. And then did you have a second item?
Yes. I'll put it under unfinished business too. Here I go again. We had talked, Nathan and I talked to one other member of council. I can't remember who it was, but we are proactively, finally, thank you, spending money on parks. We're getting money out the door. We're seeing projects starting. We're seeing projects being followed through and seeing projects finished. We had talked a while back, and we've talked a couple times, that we have the money in order to maybe designate another $400,000 to $500,000 to the parks in order to not have to come back and ask and slow the progression of the parks. That way we can start getting contractors in line to get these parks done in March and April, so that way we're not doing it around Labor Day where kids can only enjoy it for 2 months and they can actually do the whole summer. So my question here is, and I'll leave this under unfinished business because it's ongoing things, is one, I would like for some type of, I'd like staff's opinion on, is this something we can do? Two is, I do, personally to me, not really my job, but I think like Damon Park deserves a little bit of love. I don't think we've touched that at all, and I can tell you I've toured that park with people in the neighborhood. It's horrible, right? I mean, that's like 10 parks in the city at least, right? I could go on. But I feel like we've kind of placed some money all over the city in parks, but we really haven't touched over there. I think we want to finish up the things at Douglas that we've started. And I think even we need, of all the parks, I think that we have done a good job of facelifting them. However, we haven't really made one a destination park for other people from other cities to come here, nor like people from one side of a city to go somewhere else. Like for Goldman and Midway baseball, I don't know where we're at with, I'm just bringing this up, I don't know where we're at with, I know they wanted some, I don't want to call it a concession stand, but some type of place where people can travel and if they want to do tournaments. So I guess I'm just here to get staff's opinion and see what council's taste is for allocating maybe a few $100,000 more to the parks. So that way we're not ran out. And then, because I've seen this so many times, you run out of money and then we have to start all over. I don't want to start all over if we have the funds and we have progress and we're steamrolling, park board's doing well. Like, is that something that council is amenable to, trying to delegate some more money to that? And then staff, is that something that, I mean, once again, we just did appropriate a large amount of ARPA funds. Parks are something that we can see, progressing. I don't know. That's my thoughts. So
Well, Mr. Farrell, you tried to do this with the previous council, and they just kind of didn't listen to what you were saying. So we're hearing what you're saying, and yes, I mean, we're starting a situation where, you got Sherman Park done, the citizens are enjoying that. It's going to Goldman Park, and then we'll keep on going forward. So if we can continue to do that, the citizens also will notice that we're making an effort to make a place for families to gather together and spend time together. And we have a lot of parks. So to your point, yes, I mean, I feel this council has done more work in 9 months than most councils have done in 2 or 3 years. And I think we should continue to push forward and show that we are here trying to make this city a better place for people to visit, but also more importantly for our citizens to have places to go and spend time with their families, which I think this device is killing that. So when they're outside, I mean, almost of the point of, I know we have parks where we have Wi-Fi. It's almost you want to have parks that kill signals just because you want to be able to spend time. I know for emergency purposes you can't do that, but just being able to spend time outside. My happiest time is going and hiking and being outside. And we have these parks that we've had historically for a long time, and why not be able to continue that process?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree to that, especially, being on park board, looking at, we're continuing to use the same vendor pool. We've got the design, the footprint, everything that works well. We did alter some stuff with Goldman, but we did pass a not to exceed number. So with Goldman, it being a user park, and there are children with disabilities that come, we altered some of the previous plans and made some special access equipment and stuff like that there. We're also going with I think it's called a DuraPlay surface, so it's not like mulch or uneven. But it's all from the same vendors and stuff like that, and so getting the ball rolling. If there's additional funds when we take on a new park, we sort of know the process already, and so we engage the community, figure out, okay, what would they like to see, what's messed up in this park, is there anything salvageable? If not, we automatically know in our minds, okay, it's going to be X amount to do this, and really the time frame on it is not long. It's a few months. You could have it done from when you cut the purchase order to when you have the ribbon cutting. It's pretty quickly.
Right.
So I think it would make a big impact. So I think dedicating some funding towards the park, I don't know what a good number would be. Depends on where we're at financially, but I think really it makes sense to me, especially with looking at Sunny Hill being revamped, and some parks are already being revamped. It's a good thing. I think people are starting to notice all around the city that things are improving, and I've had recently a handful of citizens come up to me and say, hey, the city looks a lot better now. And it's little things, like the street sweeper. I've seen the street sweeper out 2 or 3 times in the last 30 days. It's little things like that I think kind of add up. But I would agree. I think we need to do something with the park budget. I'm excited to see what the CSO water basin is going to be. I think there's a meeting next week on that. So I think people are going to see a lot of change, and a lot of change quickly. So I support it.
Well, I think Mr. Farrell has got our budget meetings wiretapped. What I can report to you, council, is that I think you have an incredible opportunity here to steer some things. We're already at a staff level. The proposed budget to you folks is going to show, right, as of today, shows a $500,000 transfer from the general fund into the capital improvement fund for additional park programming. That's what we're modeling. We believe that where the park board will end up with its projects on city's behalf, and staff's working those projects, we'll have probably a carryover of about $1 million of that original $2 million that was set aside. So really, I think what the message, if assuming you approve an appropriation in the budget to that level, is the park board today is like, look, for 2025, theoretically you have $1.5 million to put to really good use. And what are the priorities? Now, Mr. Farrell's priority there with Damon Park most definitely is one that staff has identified, and I would encourage you folks to share your feelings with the park board. Douglas Park as well. We're actually waiting on some preliminary pricing yet this week from an engineering firm. My goal for you folks is to have plans done and bid that project out and ask for you to award that project for splash pad and other improvements sometime in the first quarter of 25. So that we may not be able to get it done by Memorial Day, but we do believe that getting it done by the 4th of July is more than doable. And that's where we're at on that. But I think the takeaway for council is the park board is very engaged. They're very thoughtful, very impressed with some of their deliberations. And I think if you have clearly expressed some of your priorities to them, they will come back with some really good plans and recommendations as to how to effectuate that.
I hope so, because that splash pad has been there 4 years not working.
We are going to fix that.
Okay.
Thank you. Are there any other unfinished business comments? All right, then we will move on to new business. Do any council members have any new business this evening? Mr. Horn?
Mr. Cahill, since you're meeting with the superintendent tomorrow, I would like to invite them to come maybe to the first meeting in October, and maybe they can have a conversation of where the school district is. They did move from 1 star to 2 stars out of 5, K through 12. Fortunately, they're still under 1 star for preschool. Maybe give us an update from last year when they reported 44% high absentee rating, but they did make a program for that. And also maybe give us an update on how the school system's doing and the workforce development that they're working with the Chamber of Commerce. And also you might want to mention to them, just in case they decline, City Council has the power of subpoena.
Any other comments or questions at this point for a new business? Mr. West, did you have anything? All right, I thought I saw you maybe. One thing I'm interested in, some people have been writing in for a while now about leaf collection. I'm wondering if staff has done any research on leaf collection for the city of Middletown and that if that's coming back, what that could look like monetarily.
Yeah, we're examining that. That's something that I've asked staff to start looking into to see about its feasibility. It's not as simple as one may think it is. It's very labor intensive and time consuming. And so we're examining within existing budget parameters, staffing levels, what would have to be added. And is it right to propose some sort of service like that next year, or maybe wait 1 more year so that we are confident that we can provide it in a first-class fashion? The worst thing you can do with that service is not do it well. So there's some details there. You know me, Mayor, I like to push folks to be at their best and do the best we can for the community. But we also have to be mindful of the worst thing, it's worse to not do it well in its first rollout than to not do it at all.
Well, thank you. I'm glad that we're having that conversation.
Yes.
People are asking and curious, so that's great. When we hear more, that'll be good to hear it. Any other new business tonight? Nope. Okay, hearing none, we will move on. The next item on the agenda is executive session. And let me go back so I can read this correctly. Do we have a motion to move to executive session under the authority of ORC 121.22G2 to consider the purchase of property for public purposes or for the sale of property at competitive bidding if premature disclosure of information would give an unfair competitive or bargaining advantage?
Motion.
Do we have a second?
Second?
It has been properly moved and seconded to move to executive session. We will proceed to vote. Mrs. Skank, please call the roll. Oh, certainly.
Nathan, are we only going in to talk about property, or are we also talking about collective bargaining or anything?
No, it would be for just collective bargaining purposes.
Yeah.
Oh, do we have a typo?
Yes.
Typo. So it is not G2.
Okay.
It is the one that is collective bargaining. So,
I will pull that up really quick.
Thank you.
sorry.
That's fine.
That's why we
Glad you caught
stopped.
that.
I was like, that's not the right thing.
So we will amend that motion shortly.
Yes, sorry about that.
Fine. I'm glad you caught it.
If I were only Brody, he would have this section memorized offhand. I'm getting close, sorry. All right, so it would be 121.22G for preparing for conducting or reviewing negotiations or bargaining sessions with public employees concerning their compensation or other terms and conditions of their employment.
And do I need to amend that motion in any way? Do I need to have any
You could
specific
just say,
language?
so moved.
So moved, okay. Now let's proceed to vote.
I need a second, I'm sorry. And somebody probably seconded, but I was so thrown off by realizing that the wording was wrong, I didn't hear it, I'm sorry.
Okay,
Motion here.
I'm sorry?
Didn't I motion it?
I thought it was, I'm not sure.
And then I seconded.
Okay, there we
All
go.
right.
That sounds good.
Sorry. All right, so I'll call the roll now. Mr. West,
Yes.
Mr. Horn,
Yes.
Mayor Slamka,
Yes?
Mrs. Carter,
Yes.
Mr. Farrell.
Yes.
The yeses have it. We will move to executive session. We will come back to adjourn.
No, I don't know about that. Amy made the mistake. That's what happened.